everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
What I'm Guinevere Fate. Chapter 129 to 155. Chapter 129. The King of Knights chooses to take a step back soon after, the King of Conquerors departed, taking his little master with him aboard his undamaged thunder chariot. After he left, the King of Knights fixed her gaze on Guinevere, her eyes betraying all the questions she longed to ask. Guinevere, are you serious? Can you truly manifest them all? The silver armor faded away, revealing her casual shorts and shirt. By now Kiritsugu Amiya had entrusted Mia to the maids, instructing them to take her to a bedroom to rest. But as soon as the King of Conquerors was gone, he had to rush to support Irisveal, who could no longer hold herself up. With the complete souls of 3 servants, Lancer, Berserker, and Assassin now inside her, Irisveal's body could feel pain. The weight of the souls pressed down on her, leaving her nearly paralyzed. Watching them, Guinevere and the King of Knights chose not to intrude. Instead, they leaped onto the roof of a nearby building to speak. To be precise, it will be Sir Tristan and my Berserker Knight order. Speaking of which, I actually thought this would be my noble phantasm as a Berserker. Slightly disappointed, yet not entirely so, the King of Knights had hoped to see Gawain and the others. Yes, it would be wonderful if Gawain and the others could appear too, Guinevere said. I can't convince you with words, nor can I persuade you in other ways. But some of them are far more eloquent than I am. Besides, if they all told you they're willing to bear the world's condemnation for your sake and begged you not to put so much pressure on yourself, you'd surely listen a little more, wouldn't you? The King of Knights tilted her head slightly to the left, unable to meet Guinevere's gaze. The King of Heroes' words had indeed struck a chord, further weakening her resolve. Guinevere, do you truly not care about the condemnation? Of course not. Not if that's the price for deceiving the world. Then wait here for a moment. With that, the King of Knights leaped down to where Irisveal lay limp in Kiritsugu's arms. She gently took Irisveal from him and whispered in her ear for a moment. In return, she received a small booklet. Then, she handed Irisveal back to Kiritsugu Amiya. This is... Back on the roof, the booklet from Irisveal was now in Guinevere's hands. It was a hand-drawn booklet, only half-finished. But as Guinevere quickly flipped through it, her expression flickered between light and shadow, her emotions warring until the King of Knights spoke. Irisveal drew this herself. She modified the faces of you and me from the doujinshi she'd seen before. What do you think? It's manga style and only bears a slight resemblance to us, but can you honestly say you don't mind? After learning why the King of Knights was so determined to clear her name, Guinevere had sought out and read some of those doujinshi herself. After skipping the genres she disliked, she found herself quite engrossed in the ones featuring her and the gender-bent King of Knights. After all, they looked nothing like the characters in the comics, allowing her to read them with the detached perspective of an outsider. But if the characters in the doujinshi bore even a slight resemblance to their real selves, does Irisveal plan to distribute this? No, she only intends to use it for herself. For herself. Guinevere's eyelid twitched. She couldn't begin to imagine just how far this married woman had ventured into the new world of fandom. So, Leah, Guinevere asked, what will you do if I mind? And what will you do if I don't? If you mind, then you'll agree with my plan and help me clear your name. Leah, I think you're misunderstanding something, Guinevere said. Even if you clear my name, the number of doujinshi about us won't decrease. At most, the mainstream NTR doujinshi will just be replaced by pure love doujinshi featuring you and me. If you want there to be no doujinshi, then you and I would have to be completely unknown to future generations. The King of Knights was momentarily at a loss for words. Upon reflection, she realized Guinevere was right. Yet, the future Guinevere described one filled with pure love doujinshi made her heart flutter. She found herself thinking, that would be perfect. In that scenario, their true appearances still wouldn't be known, and she could continue to read them from an outsider's perspective. It was in that instant that the King of Knights realized the truth. She wanted to clear Guinevere's name, but that name she most wanted to clear wasn't about historical achievements. It was about the fact that nearly all the doujinshi about them in later eras were NTR. What she truly wanted to change was her own reputation. Taking a deep breath, she chided herself for being so selfish, but Miss Artoria simply couldn't accept the situation as it was. Leah, Guinevere prompted, you still haven't told me, what if I don't mind? Then for the rest of the night, you will do everything in this doujinshi to me, to prove you don't mind. Guinevere had no idea what the King of Knights was thinking at that moment. She didn't know that Leah had already retreated a step in her mind, nor that she had hastily changed her stance to not minding. All Guinevere knew was that if she followed the instructions in the doujinshi, it would be a complete reward for her. Leah, she began, I contacted the clock tower yesterday. I told them to find more indie artists and commission more Yuri doujinshi of the King of Knights and Guinevere. I also told them that from now on, they shouldn't just make the public believe Lancelot is a fairy girl, they should also make them think you're a mature woman. In the court dramas about the King of Knights, there will be no room for any boys to set foot. Guinevere had originally planned to reveal this later, as it was just one of the methods she'd devised to change her and the King of Knights' current reputations. As things stood, the public believed Lancelot was a fairy girl, and the King of Knights was a man. In the popular NTR doujinshi, the King of Knights, depicted as a middle-aged man, was cuckolded by the fairy girl Lancelot. The reason for this was the historical rumor that had persisted for centuries, that Guinevere, from birth, was a fool who only loved girls. So Guinevere concluded, if the King of Knights is also a girl, then pure love doujinshi about the King of Knights and Guinevere should gradually be able to compete with the current mainstream. In the future, I'll commission Japanese anime companies to produce works where the King of Knights is a girl. I'm certain I can make it so that 90% of future doujinshi are pure love stories. Then, I'll find a way to forge some historical artifacts. I'll claim that the stories about Guinevere and Fairy Lancelot were just wild fabrications by future novelists. The historical evidence will prove that the King of Knights and Guinevere were deeply in love, and that Guinevere wasn't the wicked queen who brought ruin to the kingdom. After all, how can you blame the fall of a kingdom on just one girl? Guinevere's words poured out in a torrent, striking the King of Knights. It made her realize that Guinevere was truly taking action. Her desire to live in the present and change her reputation from this moment forward wasn't just empty talk. The King of Knights didn't know what to say. Her already hesitant heart retreated another step. She decided to wait and see if Guinevere could succeed. If not, she would find a way to travel to the past and change the future from there. As this thought crossed her mind, the King of Knights suddenly realized that it had never been an either-or choice between her and Guinevere. If she simply took a step back, the conflict between them would cease to be a conflict at all. Surprisingly, the King of Knights didn't dwell on whether she would still insist on her own plan if Guinevere failed. Perhaps, deep down, she believed that once Guinevere set her mind to something, there was nothing she couldn't achieve, that she had never truly failed. Guinevere, she said, as I just mentioned, I'm giving up on my wish to the Holy Grail. I'll choose to gain a physical body and stay with you in the modern era for a while. During this time, I'll fulfill my duties as your partner and observe whether you can truly change the present from the present. In the end, Miss Artoria chose to take a step back. She allowed herself to be held in Guinevere's arms, letting Guinevere begin to do the things she'd read about in those doujinshi. Chapter 130, Kirai's inevitable betrayal. 1360 words. They kissed and embraced, but they were still in a public place. After a long kiss, the King of Knights masked her shyness with a stern expression. Guinevere then swept her up in a princess carry, intending to take her straight to the bedroom. Guinevere was the master, and the King of Knights was the servant. So when the master was low on mana, it was perfectly normal for them to engage in the proper master-servant act of replenishing magic, right? But there was a problem with that. It was always the master who replenished the servant's mana, and Guinevere's current master was Irisveil von Einsburn. Just as the couple was about to head back to their room for some replenishing magic, Kiritsugu Amiya stopped them. He proactively placed Irisveil's hand in Guinevere's and said, "Saber, your mana is full. Can you accompany me to the Holy Church? I have a feeling Tokiomi Tosaka will make a move against the church's supervisor. He has to go all in at this point. Castor, he continued, addressing Guinevere, don't worry. I know Saber is no match for Archer, so I won't recklessly send her into battle. I need her help against Kirai Koto mine. Even without his servant, that man is still a venomous snake. Besides, he added, if you need to replenish your mana, you should be asking Irisville. Should one say Kiritsugu Amiya was a man who would do anything for victory? His judgment of Tosaka was flawless, his request to Saber was perfectly reasonable, and his arrangement for Irisville. From a purely logical standpoint, even Guinevere couldn't find fault with it. So, caught between her own gritted teeth, and the King of Knights' duty first nature. Kiritsugu Amiya, this is the second time you've done this. After her outburst, Guinevere still allowed the King of Knights to leave with Kiritsugu. She would hurry to join them after completing her mana replenishment. While they were on their way, right there in the messy courtyard, Guinevere began to seek mana from Irisville. Of course, although both methods involved the exchange of bodily fluids, the mana replenishment with Irisville was entirely different from what she had intended to do with the King of Knights. At Irisville's insistence, Guinevere used her noble phantasm, the Holy Sword, to drink a small amount of blood, then drew mana from the sword itself. From its very creation, the replica Holy Sword possessed the ability to extract mana from consumed blood. Once her mana was partially restored, Guinevere dripped her own blood into Irisville's mouth, and began a more thorough falsification and reinforcement of her body, ensuring her fragile flesh could withstand more servant souls. By first imbuing her with blood and then applying falsification, Guinevere could perform the reinforcement more easily, and with less mana. Irisville, your physical constitution and soul strength have now been doubled. The replenished mana was consumed rapidly, even forcing Guinevere to draw upon the small amount of mana stored within the physical Holy Sword. Her second noble phantasm was excellent in every way, except for its immense mana consumption. And falsifying the Lesser Grail was proving to be far more demanding than she had anticipated. Of course, there was another reason. She was unwilling to perform the orthodox mana replenishment ritual with Irisville. Castor, I'm sorry to trouble you, but in your current state, the command spells, I'm giving them all to you. I no longer have any use for them. After completing the falsification on Irisville, restoring her to apparent health, their next move was naturally to head toward the Holy Church for support. But before that, Guinevere needed to replenish her mana again, and she couldn't afford to drink any more of Irisville's blood. They performed the ritual to transfer the command spells. After what the King of Knights had said, Guinevere truly no longer needed them as a failsafe. Once all 4 remaining command spells were transferred to Irisville, she used 3 of them in quick succession, instantly refilling Guinevere's mana. If everything went smoothly, they would intercept the King of Heroes party outside the Holy Church. By then, Guinevere would be at full mana while the King of Heroes would still be nearly depleted. They could eliminate him for good tonight. Tokiomi Tosaka is out of command spells, Guinevere thought. And 2 men can't perform the normal mana replenishment ritual, can they? If they resort to blood, even draining Tosaka dry wouldn't convert to enough mana to fully restore the King of Heroes. Falsification created wings, allowing Guinevere to fly while carrying Irisville. Meanwhile, Kiritsugu's voice crackled through Irisville's earpiece. He reported that they had been waiting outside the church for some time, but had seen no sign of Tosaka and his servant. Irisville, since Castor's mana is fully replenished, attacked the Tosaka residence directly. This was Kiritsugu Amiya's judgment. Hearing his order, Guinevere changed course, and flew straight toward the estate. However, when she arrived minutes later, she found only Rin Tosaka, and her mother unconscious, and Tokiomi Tosaka his soul shattered, his body reduced to a vegetative state. His contract with the King of Heroes seemed to have been severed. Rewinding time to the moment Tosaka's party returned home, just after he entrusted Rin to his wife's care. At that moment, he was about to proceed to the Holy Church as planned, intending to ask Risei Kotomine to bend the rules and grant him a few command spells. But just as Tosaka was about to step out the door, he received a communication from Kirai Kotomine. Kirai reported that he was still near the Einsburn castle. He had witnessed the king of conquerors and his master depart, and had seen Kiritsugu and Saber driving a luxury car toward Fuyuki. Kirai's assessment continued. He knows you've lost your command spells, and the King of Heroes is hardly an obedient servant. The Holy Church is likely his primary target for surveillance. This judgment halted Tosaka in his tracks. It also reminded him of a much easier source for 3 command spells. Though Kirai Kotomine had lost his servant, his 3 command spells remained intact. Thus, while Kiritsugu and the King of Knights headed for the Holy Church, and Guinevere was still tending to Irisville's recovery, Kirai accepted Tosaka's invitation and returned to the Tosaka residence. He was led to Tosaka's study, where he endured a lecture on various grand principles. But in the end, all Tosaka wanted were Kirai's command spells. As for Kirai, his mind was consumed by the King of Heroes' words from when he had first entered the mansion. Do you still wish to oppose Kiritsugu Amiya? Are you willing to abandon the first desire your heart has ever known, the first pleasure you have ever truly savored? Yesterday, as you fought Kiritsugu Amiya to reclaim Rin, and her mother, your heart pounded fiercely in your chest. Kirai Kotomine, follow the voice within your heart. Pursue your own pleasure. This is your only chance. In the study, Tosaka's voice echoed in Kirai's ears, while the King of Heroes' voice resounded in his heart. By the time he realized what he was doing, the Azoth sword, the mystic code dagger Tosaka had gifted him as a sign of his apprenticeship, was already plunged into Tosaka's back, piercing his heart. As Tosaka stared in disbelief, the King of Heroes suddenly materialized. He flicked the teacup Tosaka had been drinking from, yet intervened to preserve his physical body. I have decided to bestow the Holy Grail upon him, the King of Heroes declared. Therefore, he must remain alive. Due to the rift Guinevere had created between them, Tosaka had been wary when seeking Kirai's command spells. He had even prepared to seize them by force if necessary. But he never anticipated being outmaneuvered by the King of Heroes, who had orchestrated Kirai's betrayal. At the critical moment, Tosaka found himself unable to cast any magecraft. In his final moments of consciousness, Tosaka watched as the King of Heroes drew a bizarrely shaped dagger. With it, he severed the contract between Tosaka and his servant, then immediately forged a new pact with Kirai. Chapter 131, Chapter 131, An Ordinary Morning with the King of Knights. 1368 words. The next day, Guinevere awoke with the King of Knights in her arms. They had completed the magical energy replenishment. Last night, after discovering Tosaka had been left in a vegetative state, she had brought his entire family back to the castle. When Kiritsugu learned of Tosaka's fate, he immediately deduced that Kirai must be responsible, and that the King of Heroes was now under his control. Without hesitation, he left behind only his familiars and surveillance cameras before bringing the King of Knights back. He knew Kirai still had command spells remaining, and wasn't willing to risk an opportunistic attack. Furthermore, he was aware that Risei Kotomine, the priest at the church, was Kirai's father. He refused to gamble on confronting Kirai outside the church's sanctuary, unsure if Risei and the executors who had recently arrived would intervene on Kirai's behalf. Guinevere, Kiritsugu began, now that the King of Heroes has recovered his full strength, our agreement with the King of Conquerors is under his scrutiny. That man possesses a king's pride, Guinevere interrupted. He won't stoop to a sneak attack. If the future I've foreseen is correct, they'll wait at the Holy Grail's manifestation site, expecting us to walk right into their trap once we're ready. Brilliant morning sunlight streamed in, warming the large bed. With no fabric separating their skin, Guinevere had no desire to get up. In the King of Knights' eyes, Guinevere could still perceive a single, fixed timeline. But according to Guinevere herself, the Holy Grail war was too insignificant, completely altering its related future was no great matter. Moreover, the current state of this Holy Grail war had already deviated too much from the single-line future she had foreseen. So it's just should. Yeah, the future can change, but it requires people to actively change it. If a person remains the same unaware of the future, and with no significant change in personality their actions can still be predicted with about 70 to 80% accuracy. As she spoke, Guinevere's hand began to tease the King of Knights' waist, forcing her to retaliate before hastily recomposing her serious facade. Having chosen to yield and feeling much more relaxed after the night's events, the King of Knights Ahog finally perked up a little. "Guinevere, I've conceded this much for you. Are you satisfied now? I'm overjoyed that Leah is willing to admit she's the 01. The what?" Her gaze was blank, her tone bewildered. It seemed the Holy Grail hadn't granted her knowledge on that particular subject. "Should I tell her?" Guinevere considered their upcoming battle with the King of Conquerors scheduled for the night. If the King of Heroes were to launch an unexpected assault on the castle, the newly restored barrier would provide ample warning. As for Kiritsugu Emiya, Guinevere had already warned him last night. She'd told him she was tired and wanted to rest properly with the King of Knights, so they wouldn't be fighting during the day. With that settled, Guinevere decided to explain. She began to educate the King of Knights on certain terminology, opening the door to the other world she was already in but completely unaware of. Once the King of Knights roughly understood what Guinevere had meant, her expression flickered between light and shadow. She was certainly unwilling to admit she was the 0. They fought and wrestled until the sun hung high in the sky, and their stomachs began to rumble with hunger again. But while their bodies were empty, Guinevere's spirit finally felt fully sated. "Guinevere," the King of Knights began, "do you really think Kyrie Kodomine won't move against his father? Or that his father will truly abide by the Holy Grail War's rules, and not grant him extra command spells?" Their battle over, the two lay flat on their backs, staring blankly at the canopy of the large bed. After a short rest and a bath, it would be Guinevere's turn to cook again. Once they had rested enough, they stepped into the cylindrical tub Guinevere had conjured with falsification. As they washed, their conversation drifted back to the Holy Grail War. This time, Guinevere's hand gently twirled strands of the King of Knights' short hair, winding them into little circles. "Based on the future I've seen, Kyrie Kodomine will undoubtedly strike against his father. He'll do whatever it takes to defeat Kiritsugu. However, while he can move against the Holy Church, we can't. If we try to seize anything from them, it would be tantamount to declaring war on the modern Holy Church." "Well, not that I'm afraid of a real fight," Guinevere added nonchalantly. "The clock tower would side with us." Her fingers continued their playful twirling, but the King of Knights couldn't share Guinevere's relaxed demeanor. 1,500 years had passed. The secular church had weakened, but the Holy Church had only accumulated more power. Moreover, if the clock tower and the Holy Church went to war, the scale of the conflict would dwarf this Holy Grail War. 100,000 casualties. 1,000,000. Such losses were entirely possible. Guinevere. All right. The Church today is far more restrained than it was 1,500 years ago. If I were to seek revenge, I'd only target the old relics who've survived since that era. Once the Holy Grail War is over, we still have to work on changing our public reputations, you know." After playing with the King of Knights' hair for a while longer, Guinevere turned around, allowing the King of Knights to comb through her long, ash-white locks. "Of course, if the Holy Church makes the first move." As she spoke, a hint of killing intent seeped into Guinevere's voice. Hearing this, the King of Knights leaned forward, her lips brushing against the nape of Guinevere's neck, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. They both knew that a new executor had taken up residence in Fuyuki's Holy Church. According to the mage acquaintance who had come to retrieve Sakura, this executor was specifically targeting Guinevere. The clock tower hadn't intervened simply because Guinevere didn't want them involved. She felt no concern over a single executor. Speaking of which, Kyrie Kodomine was driven out of the Fuyuki Church by that executor, wasn't he? If he returns to the church to strike at his father, he'll surely clash with her. So would Kyrie fight Seal, the executor codenamed Bao? The answer was yes. And even with Seal's extraordinary immortality, born from numerous anomalies, she would be no match for the King of Heroes and his endless treasury of noble phantasms. Bound by the chains of heaven and sealed by over a dozen noble phantasms specifically designed against dead apostles, the executor sent to ensure Guinevere's return to the throne of heroes at the end of the Holy Grail War would be ambushed and sealed by Kyrie before she even had a chance to confront Guinevere. Impressive. She can regenerate even after being burned to ash. While Guinevere and the King of Knights were still savoring their post-battle intimacy, the events they discussed were already unfolding. To Guinevere's surprise, the King of Heroes had planned to strike first, eliminating them before they could engage the King of Conquerors. However, Kyrie needed time to prepare. He had to write a letter of confession to the Lord, transfer all the command spells from his father's arm to his own, and experiment with new ways to use them. Having fought Kiritsugu Amiya once before, he believed no amount of caution was excessive. Back in Guinevere and the King of Knights' bedroom, after washing up, they both changed into simple casual clothes. They wanted to spend the day exploring Fuyuki City. Guinevere, where do you think the Holy Grail will manifest? Will it be in the heart of Mount Enzu, as you said? With us protecting her, Irisville won't die, not until the very end. Then how will you save her? We'll create a false soul and body to serve as her substitute. That should be enough. After breakfast, Guinevere walked through the streets of Fuyuki, a relaxed expression on her face. Today was her and the King of Knights' date. Chapter 132, Chapter 132, Lia, you are my only reality. 1391 words. Lia, 1, 2, 3. Dressed in shorts, a hoodie, and a baseball cap, Artoria held an ice cream cone. She stuck out her tongue for a tentative lick. The flavor, something that hadn't existed 1,500 years ago, sent a shiver through her, and her expression soured in rejection. But after 2 more bites, then 3, driven by her principle of never wasting food, her face lit up with happiness. She offered the cone, its patterned swirls now licked smooth, to Guinevere. And Guinevere? She appeared as she had at 16, wearing a light blue long dress, her silver-white hair tied back in a single ponytail. After taking the photo and putting away her phone, she obediently walked to Artoria's side. She took hold of the hand holding the cone, and in full view of everyone, licked the same spot Artoria had. Wow, look at those super cute foreign girls being so close. Because they both looked like 15 or 16-year-old girls, and their actions were typical of close friends, most passers-by assumed they were just best friends. And so, someone decided to try hitting on them. And so, someone saw Guinevere lean down, bringing their lips to the same level. Then, with a smile, she flauntingly licked away the lingering sweetness from the corner of her companion's mouth. The sounds of breaking hearts, indignant mutters, and even the whimpers of those whose eyes were open to a whole new world filled the air. In response to all this, Guinevere stood tall and proud. If anyone dared to say something truly offensive within her earshot, she would discreetly use her second noble phantasm, curse, to afflict them with foul breath for a very long time. Guinevere, isn't this a bit? Lia, do you think this little lesson is too light? Artoria fell silent, her gaze filled with helpless resignation as she looked at her increasingly ostentatious partner. In her eyes, it seemed Guinevere wanted to declare to the entire world that they were lovers. Outwardly, Artoria resisted. When Guinevere leaned in for another kiss, she pushed her away, permitting only that they share the same ice cream cone. Feeling shy, Lia? Aren't you shy at all? You bastard, Guinevere. Hee, you certainly weren't shy yesterday, after you had too much to drink. Fuyuki City was quite peaceful during the day. Today, they didn't encounter the wandering King of Conquerors or the King of Heroes. From the distant Einsburn Castle, a message came through their master-servant contract. Irisville, Mia, and Kiritsugu all wanted to enjoy a final moment of warmth before the decisive battle. If anything unexpected happened, Irisville would use her last command spell immediately. In that case, Guinevere, should I go have a drink first? They walked hand in hand, drawing stares from everyone they passed. When they neared a tavern, Guinevere pulled the speaking Artoria away. But when they passed a Chinese restaurant with a familiar name, Guinevere led her inside to eat. They didn't run into Kyrie Koto mine there. They ordered a plate of mapo tofu, but both could only manage a single bite. Please pack this up and deliver it to the Holy Church for Kyrie Koto mine. I'll pay you triple the price. It was a sort of test, a way to see if Kyrie was at the Holy Church. Even if Kyrie suspected something, he wouldn't make trouble for a familiar delivery person from the restaurant. After arranging this, he and Artoria left the restaurant. The two of them then walked to the gates of Hamurahara Academy in Fuyuki. Since it was a weekday, all they could hear were the clear sounds of students reading aloud and see children in gym uniforms running laps on the athletic field. It was there at the school gate that someone called out to them, "Which class are you from? Afternoon classes are almost over, why are you still loitering outside?" The question was prompted by their youthful appearance, the fact that the security guard was new, and because Hamurahara was the only middle school in all of Fuyuki. "We're not students," he replied with a smile. "We're just tourists." They continued walking away from the school, hand in hand. Today, Miss Artoria seemed a little envious of the lives of modern children. "I suppose so. After all, my Liao was trained to be a king from a young age, and pulled the sword in the stone at just 15. You must have wished you could grow up like a normal girl, right? How about it? After the Holy Grail War ends, should we find a school to attend together?" Artoria fell silent, not answering immediately, as if deep in thought. She recalled the Knight Academy Guinevere had founded. Its system was remarkably similar to a modern school. She looked up, their eyes meeting. If only Guinevere could see the future, she thought wistfully. Then, under the watchful eyes of the growing crowd, Artoria rose onto her tiptoes, and lightly pecked Guinevere on the cheek. She took a few light steps back, then turned with a smile, her hands clasped behind her back. In that moment, Guinevere truly saw the image of an ordinary teenage girl in her. It felt like a bullet to the heart. Guinevere instinctively pressed a hand to her chest. The soft touch brought her back to her senses. She considered public displays of affection a form of showing off, but being so flustered that she had to check her own heartbeat. That was utterly mortifying. "Hey, what was that sudden attack for?" Guinevere demanded, closing the distance in 2 quick strides and grabbing Artoria's hand. She leaned in and whispered into her ear. Should she remain silent? Or should she respond? Artoria chose the former. Her silence only made Guinevere puff out her cheeks in frustration. She leaned closer and nibbled lightly on Artoria's earlobe. "NGH, are you going to talk or not?" A jolt like an electric shock shot through Artoria, followed by a wave of embarrassment. More and more people were gathering to watch. Even students on the sports field had stopped their activities, leaning against the fence to stare in their direction. "Guinevere, that's enough. I'm really getting angry." Her voice was low, devoid of any joking tone. Guinevere straightened up, pressing close to Artoria's side. "If only I still had a command spell right now," she muttered. Her face was pale with a hint of helplessness. Guinevere had invited Artoria out under the pretext of scouting a location for tonight's battle against the King of Conquerors, and determining if the Holy Grail could manifest somewhere other than Mount Enzu. "Fine, I'll tell you," Artoria finally relented. "I just thought you were too familiar with the modern era. The reforms you implemented in Camelot had too many modern influences. It made me wonder if you were a Guinevere who had won a previous Holy Grail war." Guinevere's smile froze. It wasn't surprising that the girl before her could recognize the modern elements in her reforms. Should I tell her? She wondered. Should I reveal that I'm just an ordinary transmigrator? I really can only see a single future timeline. Guinevere insisted. And after everything, meeting you, dying with you, holding your hand right now, does it truly matter what I've hidden? The warmth from her hand was real. Her connection with Guinevere, their time together, all of it was real. Besides, Artoria hadn't wanted to pry into these hidden secrets in the first place. "Guinevere, that was just my theory. You were the one who insisted on pressing me. But since we're on the topic..." Hand in hand, they walked into a deserted alley. Artoria smiled softly and said, "I'll wait for the day you tell me the truth yourself." Deep breaths, deep breaths. Guinevere gazed at Artoria, who was now smiling like a completely ordinary girl. She still couldn't bring herself to say it. If she did, she had no idea how to explain how she knew the future concerning Camelot and the Holy Grail War. All she knew was that the girl before her was her one and only reality. "Lia, I love you. Guinevere, I love you too." Under the setting sun, their shadows stretched long. Watched by countless eyes, they unknowingly fed dog food to people they couldn't even imagine were observing. Chapter 133, Chapter 133, Morgan, Merlin, and Rider 1452 words. Vivian. Call me Morgan. All right, Morgan. You've already waited 1500 years. Can't you wait just 2 more days? The Holy Grail War only has 2 days left. They'll stay. Then you try it. Every time my foolish sister is summoned, she has someone ask me, "Sister, is there still no letter from Guinevere?" Oh my, is that so? I get the feeling you're the one who wants to see Guinevere. That lost belt you sent your memories back to. Merlin, shut up. In Great Britain, within the inner world, in Avalon, the reclusive Merlin was conversing with Morgan, who had become a fairy. 1500 years ago, after the deaths of the King of Knights and Guinevere, Morgan had brought the King of Knights' body to Avalon as promised, intending to grant her eternal rest. But who could have guessed that without Guinevere's companionship, the King of Knights' soul would never sleep, instead pestering Morgan endlessly. As for Guinevere, the counterforce had acted too swiftly. Before Morgan and Merlin could arrive, Guinevere's soul had already forged a pact with it, and ascended directly to the throne of heroes. After that, Morgan, Merlin, and the King of Knights tried countless methods to summon Guinevere down from the throne of heroes. But they failed, just like everyone else who had attempted to summon her. They always ended up summoning a Guinevere from a different world line. It was as if the true name, Guinevere, inscribed on the throne of heroes, didn't belong to their Guinevere at all. Disappointment, despair, and repeated failures continued until Merlin witnessed the Fourth Holy Grail War in 1990. The Guinevere they sought was summoned there, drawn by a catalyst with strong affinity. After that, the King of Knights chose to make a pact with the counterforce. She had grown tired of the 1500-year wait, and decided to gamble on the chance of reuniting with Guinevere on some battlefield sooner. Before she left, they specifically summoned Mordred and arranged for the Einsburn family to acquire the sword and scabbard. Otherwise, with them still alive and the clock tower still standing, who would have dared to excavate Mordred's grave? By the way, Merlin, Morgan asked, after my foolish sister was summoned, why does she act like she doesn't remember her time in Avalon after death? How could she care about that kind of djinshi and develop such a wish? Well, could it be that she cared all along? As for why she forgot her memories of Avalon, perhaps she found the days without Guinevere's company too painful. Merlin was only speculating, but given his understanding of the King of Knights, his guesses were as good as the truth. Furthermore, while guarding Avalon, Morgan and Merlin had also investigated the truth of the Holy Grail War and the founding 3 families, who were certain to participate in the Fourth Holy Grail War, as the year 1990 approached. This was why Morgan, unable to bear Sakura's impending fate, arranged a chance encounter to inform Korea that Sakura was to be sent to the Meta House. But how to put it, after confirming the information was true, Korea actually tried to strike a deal with the old worm of his family instead of seeking her help. However, Korea's ability to summon Fairy Knight Lancelot wasn't solely due to Lancelot's historical falsification. A small part of it was because he had been tainted by the aura of Morgan, who was now a fairy. He had gained an extra connection through Morgan. Meanwhile, shifting focus from Morgan and Merlin, Guinevere, and the King of Knights had not yet returned to Einsburn Castle. At this moment, bathed in moonlight, they sat together atop the Fuyuki Bridge, waiting for the King of Conquerors to arrive. To gain a physical body and remain in the modern world, Guinevere's plan was simple: bathe directly in the black mud. She refused to believe that foul substance could have any effect on her. The so-called black mud was nothing more than the collective negative emotions of all humanity. The reason it could corrupt heroic spirits was by forcing them to confront their deepest regrets, leading them to deny their own identities and undergo an inversion. But Guinevere, having lived a full life with the King of Knights until their deaths, not a single trace of regret remained in her heart. Her current desire was nothing more than an extra indulgence. What if she didn't use the black mud? Could she rely on self-falsification again? In the Holy Grail War, the Holy Grail system itself was responsible for summoning servants. The mages merely selected the heroic spirit and anchored them to the world. This meant that if Guinevere hadn't obtained a true physical body by the end of the war, she would be instantly sent back to the throne of heroes. Therefore, to be safe, bathing in the black mud for incarnation was a necessary step. Of course, while Guinevere was confident in herself, she had absolutely no faith that the King of Knights could withstand the black mud. But as long as she remained, she believed she could find a solution for everything. So you're saying if I want a physical body, I just need to bathe in the black mud when the time comes. And the reason you accepted my challenge instead of wasting time trying to persuade me into an alliance is because you don't believe I can withstand the mud, and also, for the Holy Grail to begin manifesting, it requires the souls of at least 4 servants to be offered. So that's how it is. I've really been underestimated. It's because the King of Heroes EA is a perfect counter to your Ionioi Hetairoi. Atop the steel structure of the Fuyuki Bridge, Guinevere, the King of Knights, and the King of Conquerors master-servant pair each occupied one side of the summit. They chatted casually, in no hurry to begin the death match that only one side could survive. In truth, another reason Guinevere had chosen not to ally with the King of Conquerors was that the King of Heroes couldn't be corrupted by the black mud, nor would he be strengthened by it into an even more formidable foe. The King of Conquerors, however, was a different story. If his Ionioi Hetairoi were restored by the black mud, Guinevere would face a much tougher battle essentially. She'd have to deal with an additional powerful enemy. Master, I beg you. Still standing by the King of Conquerors' side, clutching his cape, Waver Velvet's eyes glistened with tears. In the few days they had spent together, he had been completely won over by the King of Conquerors, just as Guinevere remembered, willingly becoming his loyal subject. Knowing their farewell was imminent, he fought back his tears, and used all 3 of his command spells on the King of Conquerors in a single breath. Then, the King of Conquerors raised the short sword in his hand, and once again unleashed Ionioi Hetairoi. The same yellow sands and scorching sun appeared, along with the same high-spirited army. But their numbers had dwindled significantly, now fewer than 10,000, and the reality marble they could sustain would not last long. Thus, upon being dragged into Ionioi Hetairoi and arranged on the opposing side of the army, the King of Knights drew her sword and donned her armor, awaiting the start of battle. Meanwhile, Guinevere immediately modified her own class and began activating her noble phantasm as a rider. Berserker Knight Order, galloping across the battlefield rank, A+++ type, anti-army noble phantasm range, 1 to 99 maximum targets, 1 EX description. This noble phantasm summons all members of the Berserker Knight Order who once served Guinevere. They constantly await her call to return to the battlefield. Upon being summoned, all knights are treated as Guinevere's servants. They provide their own mana, which cannot be replenished. All their noble phantasms and basic parameters are reduced by 2 ranks. They are all considered to possess the rider class. If they fall in battle, they cannot be summoned again through this noble phantasm. Unlike other anti-army noble phantasms, Guinevere's Berserker Knight Order is not a reality marble. It is essentially a continuous summoning of the Knight Order. From the Order's founding until Guinevere's retirement shortly after the barbecue incident, over 1,000 knights joined its ranks over more than a decade. Guinevere summons every last one of them into the present era. After a moment of initial confusion, the knights erupt in joyous cheers. They immediately mount their horses, form ranks, and await their orders. 2 horses break from the formation, one approaching Guinevere, and the other the King of Knights. Chapter 134, Chapter 134, The King of Conquerors Exit 1462 words, Sir Tristan, it has been a long time. Everyone, it has been a long time. My king, it has been a long time. May you and the queen find eternal happiness. May you and the queen find eternal happiness. Amidst the clamor, the knights formed a charging arrowhead formation, with Guinevere still leading at the very front. As the king of knights, Artoria protected Guinevere's flank, acting as her wingman for this battle. In stark contrast to the noisy, swift charge of the knights, the vast army on the other side advanced slowly and silently under the king of conquerors' command. Rider, you. Master, even knowing defeat is certain, the king of conquerors will only die on the path of conquest. Messenger, take. I am your subject too. With 10,000 against 1,000, the king of conquerors held the numerical advantage. However, 99% of his 10,000 soldiers were inferior to the Camelot knights, and the remaining 100-odd heroes lacked classes and noble phantasms. In contrast, every one of the 1,000 knights behind Guinevere was a genuine heroic spirit knight, complete with a class and noble phantasms. Kill them. Knight order, charge. The armies advanced, the earth trembling beneath them. When they drew near, the king of conquerors' army dared to charge the cavalry with infantry, showing no trace of fear. So Guinevere granted them their wish. She broke through their lines, crossing paths with the king of conquerors. The rest of her knights followed, plunging deep into the enemy ranks. Before long, they had pierced through the enemy army. Just as they had in dozens of battles during their lifetime, they continued to charge back and forth, repeatedly carving through the enemy ranks. However, this night order was not the same as when they were alive. As the saying goes, the first charge is full of vigor, the second wanes, and the third is exhausted. Summoned by Guinevere's noble phantasm, their stats were reduced, and they couldn't replenish their mana. Casualties began to mount far sooner than they would have in life. If the Ionioi Hetairoi had suffered no losses, they might have truly been able to wear down the knights. Lia, let's end this quickly. You go take down the king of conquerors while he's focused on commanding. In this Holy Grail war, the king of knights had only managed to repel Diarmuid. Her desire for battle was far from satisfied. Guinevere and her knight order pierced through the enemy army once more, with the king of knights leading the charge straight toward the king of conquerors, who was directing his forces from the center. When the king of knights faced the king of conquerors one-on-one, her first strike beheaded his thunder ox. Her second shattered his chariot's wheels. By her third strike, the sword of promised victory was already at the king of conquerors' throat. The king of conquerors was not a servant skilled in close combat. Rider, once the mages understand the true nature of the Holy Grail War, there will be more wars to come. I look forward to sharing a drink with you again, then hopefully, by that time, you'll have a physical body. However, if you restart your conquest and wage war in the modern era, I will send you on your way again. The king of conquerors felt a pang of regret at his defeat, but he couldn't complain much about losing to an army composed entirely of knights. A direct defeat left no room for excuses. He watched his loyal followers vanish one by one, their resentful expressions fading as Guinevere sent those still trying to protect him on their final journey. Ionioi Hetairoi was collapsing, its remnants dissolving until they all reappeared on the Fuyuki Bridge. While the reality marble was active, no one knew the battle's outcome. Now that it had ended, the victor was clear at a glance. In his final moments, the king of conquerors watched Guinevere flick waver on the forehead. Your master says that when you get back, you are to write a 30,000-word report on the Holy Grail War, and a 30,000-word apology letter. Otherwise, he will no longer acknowledge you, the little thief, as his student. Listening and watching, the king of conquerors stepped past the king of knights' sword and roughly ruffled Waver's hair. Then, without needing Guinevere or the king of knights to add insult to injury, he spoke, King of knights, I'll remember your invitation to drink. And Guinevere, how can you be content as this little girl's queen? Your relentless charge on the battlefield didn't seem like the mark of someone who would ever bow to another. And I haven't. The king of conquerors was already fading away, having shattered his own spirit core. Hearing Guinevere's words, he froze for a moment, then realized the double meaning. He burst into laughter again. I hope so, he boomed as the laughter subsided. 1 second, 2 seconds until he vanished completely, his hand remained on Waver's head, bestowing all his remaining care upon the boy. Waver Velvet, choking back sobs, watched every moment of the King of Conquerors' departure without blinking. After a while, he wiped away his tears, and looked at Guinevere with a slightly more mature expression. Did Master Kenneth really say that? Oh, I almost forgot, Guinevere added. He also wants you to return the holy relic. He said if you want to keep it as a souvenir, you'll have to pay for its acquisition. He'll send you the bill. All of it, the apology letter, the report, everything was a fabrication by Guinevere. Waver had matured, but not enough to suspect that an incredibly beautiful and kind woman would lie to him. He also declined the invitation to visit Einsburn Castle again. Instead, he turned and hailed a taxi. After packing his belongings, he headed straight to the airport that same night to wait for his flight home. With his command spell spent, his servant gone, and Kyrie's attention elsewhere, Waver's journey home was remarkably smooth. However, he couldn't sleep well for the next few days. A 30,000-word thesis and an apology letter were no easy tasks. Meanwhile, back on Fuyuki Bridge, after watching Waver depart, Guinevere received a message from Irisville. She had successfully absorbed the soul of the King of Conquerors. Lia, how did your chat with everyone go? The Knight Order had one major advantage. Guinevere didn't need to supply mana to any of the knights. After defeating the king's army, they could have a proper conversation with the King of Knights until the noble phantasm's duration ended. When the King of Knights asked if they had any regrets, they only lamented that their lives had been too short to protect Mordred's kingdom for their king and queen. If they had another chance, they would wish to live longer, to shoulder more burdens for their king and queen. Speaking of which, Guinevere mused, Sir Tristan also has a legend involving a fairy girl falsification, yet he didn't turn into a fairy girl. By the way, would you all like to see a photo of Lancelot as a fairy girl? The knights had no regrets, only a slight sense of unfulfillment that differed from what the King of Knights had expected. After hearing them cheerfully share their thoughts, the King of Knights Ahog finally stood up noticeably. With the shadows in her heart dispelled, she wrapped her arms around Guinevere from behind, trying to spare Lancelot some face. Amid laughter and playful chaos, they eventually got to see the photo. When they returned to the Throne of Heroes, and had the good fortune to meet Lancelot again, they would surely tease him about it. This was the nature of comrades in arms, constantly teasing each other in peacetime, yet entrusting their lives to one another in battle. When the noble phantasm's duration ended, Guinevere reverted to her caster class. The King of Knights drove her back to Einsburn Castle. If the King of Heroes didn't attack tonight, then tomorrow night would likely be the final battle of this Holy Grail war. Irisville, you're still willing to die for Kiritsugu. Are you really so confident you can maintain your sense of self after being absorbed by the Holy Grail and corrupted by the Black Mud? Are you truly willing to sacrifice your life to fulfill Kiritsugu's ideal? Is Kiritsugu really that much of a succubus? At Einsburn Castle, Guinevere watched as Kiritsugu removed the scabbard from Irisville, leaving her paralyzed in agony. Guinevere winced and increased the falsification on Irisville's body. But if Irisville insisted on trying, Guinevere couldn't stop her. All she could do was wait until after Irisville's attempt, then pull out her soul and cleanse it. Chapter 135, Chapter 135, Second Noble Phantasm Unleashed. This land is also Great Britain. 1486 words. Guinevere, can you really do it? It's just all the world's evil. That night at Einsburn Castle, Guinevere spent the entire time experimenting with various ideas on Irisville. She continued to expand Irisville's physical capacity, preventing her from being crushed by the souls of the four servants, and losing control of her body. She also added a protective shell to Irisville's soul, preparing her for contact with all the world's evil. Unlike the King of Knights, Irisville wouldn't get a second chance if she failed. So, even after all this, Guinevere remained unsatisfied. She might have dismissed it as just all the world's evil, but those were merely words. Caster, you really don't need to worry so much about my life or death. From the moment I was born, I was destined to die here. In the largest bedroom of the castle, Guinevere had become intimately familiar with Irisveel's body. As she had planned, she had already succeeded in perfectly falsifying a new body for her. From this perspective, if Irisveel hadn't been determined to replace Ngramenu as the Holy Grail's core and fulfill Kiritsugu's wish, she could have already escaped her fate as the Lesser Grail. After all, the Einsborn family had only modified her physical body. They never anticipated that her soul could be extracted and transferred. But Irisveel, if you calculate your age in human terms, you're only 9 years old. Don't you want to see more of this world? Can you really bear to leave Ilia? Speaking of which, you once offered Ilia to me as a child, and I promised to save her. When I go to rescue her, I can't very well bring her the news of her mother's death, can I? Saving Ilia and Irisveel, these were two of the few lingering desires from her past life, and now she truly possessed the power and opportunity to save them both. She continued to reinforce Irisveel's soul, adding a suggestion: the moment she fell into the Holy Grail's interior, she would use her final command spell to invite Guinevere to merge with it alongside her. Kiritsugu Amiya remained wary of this plan, fearing that Guinevere would replace Irisveel as the Holy Grail's core, and then refuse to grant his wish. How about this? I could swap your soul with Irisveel's. Can you do that? I can try. In the bedroom, Guinevere's cold glare at Kiritsugu was cut short by Irisveel's interruption. If one of them had to die, Irisveel wished it would be her. Kiritsugu, you still have to defeat Kirai Kotomine, don't you? She said. If I swapped into your body, I wouldn't have the confidence to defeat him. This is the final battle, we can't afford any additional risks. After a sleepless night and a brief nap at dawn, they spent the entire day in the castle eating, chatting, and discussing tactics. They decided that Mia and the two maids would remain behind to await their victory. As the seventh night of the Holy Grail War descended, Kiritsugu set out alone. Irisveel, the King of Knights, and Guinevere drove openly toward Mount Enzo. Because Irisveel was the Lesser Grail, they had the privilege of choosing the battlefield. Just as Guinevere remembered, once Irisveel had absorbed the souls of 4 servants, the Lesser Grail would be preliminarily formed. She could then be used as a sacrifice to begin summoning the Holy Grail at one of Fuyuki's 4 major spiritual ley lines: the Holy Church, the Tosaka Residence, Mount Enzo, and the Fuyuki Public Hall. Among these 4 locations, the church was immediately ruled out. It was Kirai's base. As for the other 3, after Guinevere and the King of Knights had scouted them during the previous day, the Tosaka residence was now empty and located in the suburbs, making it an ideal site for the Holy Grail's advent. However, Guinevere wanted to preserve the estate for Rin, ensuring she wouldn't have to worry about family finances in the future. Of the remaining options, the Fuyuki Public Hall was situated in the bustling city center. If they summoned the Holy Grail there as they had in memory, they risked triggering another catastrophe on the scale of the Fuyuki fire. Therefore, the group had no choice but to select Mount Enzo. As for the monks at the mountaintop temple, after Kiritsugu Amiya called to issue his challenge, Kirai Kotomine proactively contacted the police department. He arranged for the temple's occupants to be invited to the station to assist with an investigation. In effect, a battlefield had been prepared, a place where the 2 sides could fight without restraint, free from the risk of harming innocents. Lia, is your mana sufficient? Can the scabbard be released? The souls of 4 servants were enough to summon the Holy Grail, but at least 5 were needed for it to fully materialize and grant wishes. To pierce the world and open a path to its reverse side, 6 servant souls had to be sacrificed, their spirits returning to the throne of heroes simultaneously. Only then could the victorious mage journey to the reverse side and attempt to reach the root. The victorious heroic spirit, in turn, could use the boundless mana of the reverse side to realize any wish. Theoretically, this was how Fuyuki's Holy Grail war system was supposed to function. That's enough. But in this battle, are you truly just providing support? Do you really have to wait until I'm truly losing to the King of Heroes before you'll go all out? I believe that once you retrieve your scabbard and I apply my falsification, you'll definitely be able to defeat him. I need to prepare for what comes after. The King of Knights was driving, they wouldn't dare let Irisveal take the wheel. As they drew closer to Mount Enzo, all three of them grew slightly tense. They spoke with confidence, but they knew the King of Heroes would be equally prepared. And indeed, just as their luxury sedan left the city limits and entered the Mount Enzo area, the King of Heroes and his Vimana materialized in the sky. Mongrels! You've kept this king waiting. Car, fly! The moment they sensed each other's presence, one in the sky, the others on the ground, the King of Heroes and Guinevere spoke simultaneously. At the King of Heroes' command, the Vimana's missiles launched toward them. At Guinevere's command, her second noble phantasm activated, and the luxury sedan they were riding in truly took flight. A series of thunderous explosions roused the already sleeping Fuyuki city. Citizens began turning on their lights, and through their windows, they saw the magnificent flying ship they had witnessed once before. But this time, they saw something more. Mommy, there's a car flying in the sky. I told you anime isn't lying. Miracles and true magic really do exist. A little girl waved her tiny magic wand, begging her mother to pick her up as she cheered for both sides battling in the sky. Caliba. Mana surged atop the sedan as the King of Knights unleashed her noble phantasm, her greeting to the King of Heroes. And how fast is light? Fast enough to startle the King of Heroes, who barely managed to summon a shield in time to block it. Lia, you are a dragon. Dragons can fly. Guinevere's second noble phantasm continued to activate, awakening the red dragon bloodline dormant within the King of Knights. A pair of wings sprouted from her shoulder blades, and sparks flew from her lips. With this form she had spent the afternoon adapting to, she broke the sound barrier in the sky. Though her swordsmanship couldn't match Lancelot's, under the continuous enhancement of Guinevere's falsification, all her base stats had been drastically boosted. The force behind her swings now surpassed even Lancelot's. Furthermore, the Excalibur in her hand, also known as the steel-slaying sword, could cut through steel like butter. Against noble phantasms of far inferior quality, it possessed a legendary blessing that allowed it to shatter them in a single strike. Second noble phantasm deployed. Deception of human order. This land is now Great Britain. Deception of human order, falsification of the world. This was the name of Guinevere's second noble phantasm. It could falsify the world and for a short time, deceive human order itself. For instance, she could make human order recognize this place as Great Britain, granting both herself and the King of Knights the immense buffs of fighting on home turf. Under the effect of Guinevere's noble phantasm, a third-rate servant could become first-rate, and a first-rate servant could reach the level of a grand. Staying in the rear, providing targeted buffs and enemy interference as the situation demanded. This was the proper way for a caster to fight. Guinevere could engage in close combat even in her caster class, and do it well, but it would be a waste of her true potential. Chapter 136, Chapter 136, Shoot down the King of Heroes head. 1459 words. Mongrel, mongrel, mongrel. Just how many ways can that caster's noble phantasm be used? 2 days ago, the King of Heroes had learned parts of Guinevere's true story from Tosaka. Based on these stories and his understanding of her noble phantasm, he had already deduced its true nature, the sublimation of her past deeds of falsifying history. Yet even with this knowledge, the King of Heroes' strategy remained unchanged, maintain distance, and hope to kill her with an anti-magic noble phantasm. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he once again activated the noble phantasm that concealed his true location, creating a realistic illusion. Then, rain began to fall from the sky. Guinevere's method of searching for his real position. Through this exchange, observing the King of Knights charge at his true body without hesitation, he realized that the servant contract was in Guinevere's hands. There were no barriers to their communication. Kyrie, go now. The man you wish to kill is acting alone, and he holds no servant contract. Layers of shields formed a defense. Some were shattered instantly by Excalibur, while others were kicked far away. To pursue him, the King of Knights grew a tail, using it to maintain speed and balance in the sky. To intercept him, dragon shadows began to coalesce within the downpour, lunging at him in the form of water dragons. Being hunted down and forced to flee in disarray was an indignity the King of Heroes could not long tolerate. His treasury held no shortage of noble phantasms capable of slaying dragons. Mere fakes, falsified by magecraft. Balmung, Phantasm Greatsword, felling of the Sky Demon, the cursed holy sword of the legendary dragon-slaying hero. Even if the King of Heroes couldn't unleash its true name, it still possessed an extremely potent anti-dragon attribute. Go Puppet. The king's noble phantasms contained countless treasures in innumerable forms. Since he himself was unskilled in close combat, he retrieved several autonomous puppets specialized in melee fighting. Among them was a prototype from the creation of a certain lotus root body, Neza. Though this puppet had a lotus root body and lacked any intellect, its connection to the original Neza earned it the title Neza Prototype. It also inherited the dragon-slaying legend, making it a divine puppet. As long as it didn't face an opponent with an anti-divinity attribute, its divinity was a powerful buff, greatly enhancing its base stats and potentially granting effects like immunity to attacks from non-divine, non-good, or non-evil sources. He would have it wield Balmung to engage the King of Knights. Great Britain's mystery has faded. The gods have long since vanished. Standing atop the chariot, Guinevere activated her second noble phantasm. Since this sequential effect aligned with historical precedent, the world itself lent its support, allowing her to use it with minimal mana consumption. But because of her declaration, the potent divinity of both the Lotus Root body and the King of Heroes was temporarily stripped away, weakening them both. Taking advantage of this, the King of Knights effortlessly shattered the stuttering Lotus Root body, forcing the immortal puppet into a brief regeneration period. Meanwhile, the King of Heroes drew a noble phantasm capable of dispelling curses. Yet, a second later, he abandoned the idea of using it on himself to reclaim his stolen divinity. He despised the gods, and he despised his own divine bloodline even more. Though his stats dropped without his divinity, his excitement soared. He gazed at Guinevere with an unprecedented possessiveness. "You will become mine." Laughing maniacally, the King of Heroes unleashed his full power, heedless of mana consumption. The ripples in the sky no longer numbered in the tens or hundreds, they now blanketed the entire heavens, raining down noble phantasms upon the King of Knights. This downpour was so dense, with noble phantasms packed tightly together, that it left the King of Knights no room to display her martial skill. Excalibur. This was the second strike of the noble phantasm. The light of ever victory shot straight into the heavens as Guinevere channeled the mana stored within the replica holy sword to replenish the King of Knights. Upon actually using it, Guinevere discovered the replica holy sword held far more mana than she had anticipated. After the loosely accumulated mana on its outer layer was expended, the mana deeper within grew increasingly dense and tightly packed. The total amount was at least 3 times her initial estimate. King of Knights, she possesses protection from arrows. This was Guinevere's second noble phantasm. While she focused all her energy on shattering the Skyfall noble phantasms, she was left vulnerable to the scattered attacks emerging from all directions. The King of Heroes' ability to open the gates of Babylon also seemed to have its limits. The King of Knights lacked divinity, and her base stats were already exceptionally high thanks to Guinevere's noble phantasm. The chains of heaven, a conceptual noble phantasm that bound its target tighter the greater their divinity, once used to restrain the bull of heaven, were swatted away before they could even wrap around her. Then, recovering from the post-noble phantasm release paralysis, she slashed a rift in the sky itself. But the King of Heroes' noble phantasms remained endless, and Kyrie still had many command spells to replenish his mana. Lia, don't wait for the King of Heroes to draw his sword. Charge forward with your shield and force a kill. I'll restrict his movements. The reign of noble phantasms had fallen long enough. Though the King of Heroes repelled every projectile with his mana, the Vimana beneath his feet was now thoroughly soaked enough for Guinevere to launch a surprise attack. Water, bind him. The moisture on the Vimana coalesced into chains, striking at the King of Heroes like serpents. But having already seen the rain turn into ice cones, he was long wary of what had seemed like mere reconnaissance. Guinevere's true purpose, however, was only to distract him. In that brief moment, the King of Knights decisively released Avalon, advancing under the protection of the Type Moon World's ultimate defensive noble phantasm. With Avalon unleashed, what did the endless rain of noble phantasms matter? They were no more threatening than ordinary raindrops. By the time the King of Heroes reacted, he instinctively reached for EA, only to realize that even EA could not breach Avalon's defense. He could see it clearly, the scabbard ignored all physical interference. Even the 5 true magics of the Type Moon world could not touch it. It was the world's strongest absolute defense. From the moment the King of Knights reclaimed her scabbard, it became impossible for him to shoot her down. The only remaining challenge for her was closing the distance. And that was a problem Guinevere's noble phantasm was more than capable of solving. Second noble phantasm, third stage release, all who stand upon the soil of Great Britain shall bow before the King of Knights. He had already given up, already accepted defeat. But when Guinevere used her noble phantasm to falsify the world's rules for a third time, his rage finally boiled over. The flicker of fascination, the trace of possessiveness he felt for her, all of it twisted into a pure, destructive impulse. The reign of noble phantasms ceased, instead forming a shield to block the King of Knights' advance. He drew EA, aiming it directly at Guinevere, the woman who had shattered his reason. At this moment, the King of Heroes intended to unleash his full power to kill Guinevere before his inevitable defeat arrived. Seeing his choice, both the King of Knights and Guinevere breathed a sigh of relief. While Avalon offered invincible defense, maintaining it was incredibly mana-intensive. If the battle devolved into a war of attrition, Guinevere wasn't sure they could win. More importantly, she didn't want to waste too much mana on the King of Heroes. After eliminating him, she needed enough mana left to await the Holy Grail's descent. And besides dealing with all the world's evil, she also anticipated a potential clash with an altered King of Knights. Both of them sought incarnation from the black mud. Full power. Let's end this now. Artoria Pendragon, cover your eyes and see him as a threat to the planet itself. Guinevere's actions were all to enable the King of Knights to fully unleash her holy sword. At that very moment, an AI-like voice echoed in her mind, asking if she would permit the King of Knights to unleash the holy sword of the planet. In this world, Guinevere was the first knight of the Round Table. I declare by my true name, this is a battle for the world's survival. Well, probably. Guinevere certainly thought so. Chapter 137, Chapter 137, Restraints Released, the Holy Sword of the Planet. 1332 words. Hey, Merlin, do you think a caster class Guinevere could qualify as a grand heroic spirit? She's still a little ways off from my level. But if she could fully master that noble phantasm of hers, she might just have what it takes to touch grand status. And what about my foolish little sister? Having regained her scabbard and now able to unleash Excalibur's holy sword of the planet form. She's undoubtedly a half-grand. In her current state, she's more than enough to strike down the present-day Gilgamesh. Within Avalon, the two spectators who already knew the outcome continued to discuss the war's progress. Above Fuyuki City, the Sword of Rupture whipped up a spatial storm, while the restraints on the holy sword of the planet continued to release, one by one. Following Guinevere. Bedivere, the king is always right. Lancelot, the target is not a fairy. Just to be clear, I'm not a fairy. Mordred, father. It's father. It's been so long, father. I'll release the restraint right away. Kay, my sister, if I don't agree, the next time I see Guinevere, she'll bury me in chores, won't she? Fine, I acknowledge it. This is a battle for survival. Agravain, my king, I apologize for failing to ensure Mordred's kingdom endured longer. But I will set aside that regret for now. If you are fighting to pursue your own lasting happiness, then I acknowledge this as a battle for your truth. The Holy Sword's 13 restraints corresponded to the 13 Knights of the Round Table, including the King of Knights herself. To unleash the Holy Sword's full power, only 7 of these restraints needed to be released. With Guinevere's acknowledgement, followed by Bedivere and the other 4 knights, only one final restraint stood between Excalibur and its full might. And this final seal, the King of Knights could break herself. This is a battle to save the world. The corrupted Holy Grail must not fall into the hands of chaos and evil. Though the 7 knights seemed to speak at length, their thoughts were transmitted in an instant. Just a fraction of a second after the King of Heroes began to gather his power, the King of Knights gained full access to the holy sword of the planet. And as she began her chant, "This is the breath of the stars, the brilliant torrent of life," the ever-victorious king was about to unleash her sword of certain victory. At this moment, the holy sword ascended, joining the King of Heroes EA as an EX-rank noble phantasm. One was a blade that sundered heaven and earth, the other, a blade that vanquished enemies of the planet. If their wielders were alive, the outcome of such a clash would be uncertain, depending on their individual power output. But since both were merely servants' extensions of the planet's counterforce, the latter had no reason to lose. To oppose Excalibur in this form was to first face the planet's denial. The brilliant, radiant light surged forward relentlessly, swallowing the spatial rifts created by EA's wind pressure. It continued its advance until it engulfed the King of Heroes, then pierced straight through to the heavens. In that instant, Guinevere's illusory rain curtain shattered, and the full moon behind the clouds once again shed its gentle, veil-like light. A few seconds later, Irisveal, still inside the car, felt the King of Heroes' soul vanish, confirming his withdrawal from the battle. With the enemy of the planet eliminated, the Holy Sword's restraints returned, sealing its power from EX rank back down to A++. Panting, the King of Knights flew back to Guinevere and Irisveal, her restored sword in hand. Her gaze held admiration for Guinevere, and after they exchanged a knowing smile, she turned to Irisveal with concern, asking, "Irisveal, has Kiritsugu Amiya contacted you? Does he need help?" Guinevere's advice to bring heavy weaponry was already the greatest help he could have received. According to Guinevere and Irisveal's suggestion, Mia and the maids were supposed to rest at the castle. But Mia couldn't stay still. Though her health was a fragile illusion, she was still able to move freely, ready to once again risk her life for her beloved Kiritsugu. However, she would no longer need to sacrifice her life. Under the surveillance of familiars and cameras, Kirai Kotomine had never followed the King of Heroes to Mount Enzo. He had simply remained within the Holy Church, waiting for Kiritsugu Amiya's arrival, and ready to use command spells to support the King of Heroes at a moment's notice. When the King of Heroes unleashed the King's Vault on a massive scale, Kirai used 3 command spells. When the King of Heroes attempted to clash head-on with the Holy Sword of the planet using his EX rank power, Kirai used another 3. But the result of all 6 command spells was the same. He witnessed the King of Heroes lose to the King of Knights' sword and scabbard. Standing in the church, gazing at the statue of the Lord, Kirai couldn't utter a single word of complaint. He knew that if he didn't give up now, death would be his next visitor. Yet, how could he possibly give up, especially with Kiritsugu Amiya now standing just outside the Holy Church's gates? Would Kiritsugu Amiya enter? Of course not. He wasn't foolish enough to step into Kirai Kotomine's home turf. He had arrived by car, having acquired even heavier weaponry over the past 2 days. If Kirai refused to come out and continued to wait inside the church, Kiritsugu would call him out with the RPG slung over his shoulder. Guinevere had reminded him that while Kirai Kotomine was an executor, he wasn't an opponent who required the origin bullet to be killed. Conventional heavy weapons were more than capable of ending his life. The RPG exploded, shattering the church's main doors and blowing them inward. Kirai Kotomine could only turn around, his face contorted in an ugly grimace. He knew full well what kind of man Kiritsugu Amiya was, yet he had still underestimated his shamelessness. He never imagined Kiritsugu could acquire such a devastating weapon in the Far East, where firearms were strictly prohibited. Handguns and submachine guns were one thing, even a sniper rifle that could be disassembled for transport was acceptable. Kirai, this is the second shot. Kiritsugu Amiya had raided the nearest military base. If it weren't for the unwanted attention it would draw, he would have brought a tank or a fighter jet. Kirai, the times have changed. Kiritsugu had no desire for small talk after what Kirai had done to Mia. While Kiritsugu could set aside his emotions to weigh the scales of justice, he was still a man of deep personal feelings. But as Kirai Kotomine charged forward through a hail of heavy machine gun fire, carving a path with his black keys, it was Mia who delivered the final blow. She had arrived on her own, dragging a sniper rifle with her, and it was she who buried him. And Kirai Kotomine, until his death, never understood what kind of person Kiritsugu Amiya truly was, nor what his wish was. At this point on the surface, the Holy Grail War was left with only the Einsburn faction. Lighting a cigarette and exhaling smoke, Kiritsugu didn't spare a glance at Kirai's shattered head. He ignored the faint, struggling sounds from within the church. After regrouping with Mia, they left immediately, needing to rush to Mount Enzo to conduct the ritual to summon the Holy Grail. But as their car drove further away, the struggles within the church ceased. The exposed corpse of Kirai Kotomine, its destroyed tissues and blood, began to writhe as if alive, converging back into the gaping wound. Kiritsugu Amiya did not yet know that merely blowing Kirai's head off was no longer enough to kill him. For this final battle, Kirai had prepared more than just command spells. Chapter 138. Chapter 138. Dead Apostle Kirai, and Holy Grail Irisveal 1411 words, Bao Seal, originally named Elysia, was born in 1976 to an ordinary farming family in France. She was one of the potential reincarnation vessels prepared by the true ancestor vampire, Roa. In 1988, at the age of 12, she was forced to awaken as a true ancestor's reincarnation vessel. She became a vampire, her body possessed by Roa, and began an endless slaughter. Subsequently, she was hunted down by the Holy Church and the true ancestor princess, Arcuade Brunestad. After being killed, she resurrected due to her true ancestor bloodline. Through studying her, the Holy Church discovered that at the moment of her first death, Roa's soul had already transferred to another spare body. The original 12-year-old girl was now able to regain control of her current body. From that point on, Seal of the Bao was born. Possessing a true ancestor's body and considerable magecraft aptitude, she quickly rose to the 7th seat of the burial agency. After that resurrection, the world came to recognize her as Roa. No matter how many times she died or in what manner, as long as Roa himself was alive, she would always revive. Simply put, to kill her by conventional means, one had to kill Roa first. Unconventional methods would require manipulating more fundamental world rules, such as using the mystic eyes of death perception, or directly altering the world's rules so it no longer recognized her as Roa. What if the goal wasn't to kill her, but merely to transfer all her dead apostle traits to someone else? Kirai, is this your choice? I bear her no grudge, and for the past 2 years, she has been a junior I've come to admire. Why would I kill her? King of Heroes, for you, killing her or transferring her dead apostle bloodline to me, are they not of the same difficulty? Kirai, are you actively seeking to betray your lord? King of Heroes, the Lord never forbids any living being from believing in him. As executors, we only eliminate heretics. Gate of Babylon, rank EA++, contained all noble phantasms from ancient times to the present. With this treasury, the King of Heroes could, in theory, accomplish anything. And in fact, the King of Heroes did just that. He transferred all of Seal's dead apostle traits to Kirai Kotomine, turning Seal into an ordinary human girl. That's why, even after Kiritsugu left and the King of Heroes Seal was removed, Seal still couldn't climb out of her coffin though she remained a capable executor. Meanwhile, outside the church, Kirai Kotomine, whose head had been blown apart, was fully restored under the immortality rule of that true ancestor. His eyes snapped open. At that moment, his eyes were already crimson. So this is what it feels like to no longer be human. How exhilarating. Kiritsugu Amiya, I can't wait to see the look on your face when you see me again. Newly resurrected, Kirai naturally felt the urge to feed, but his bloodlust was directed solely at Kiritsugu Amiya. Turning back, he blasted away the church rubble, his face reverting to its usual impassive expression in the process. When he reached the basement and threw open the coffin trapping Seal, He simply looked at the shocked girl and said, "The anesthetic I gave you will last another 6 hours. And I believe you owe me a favor. We executors all know you have 2 wishes, to kill Roa, and to die as an ordinary human. Now, I've made you an ordinary human." In the coffin, Seal's blue eyes went still. A moment later, a mix of joy and confusion filled them. After Kyrie tore the tape from her mouth, she spoke. "What do you want?" "The method to use the 7th Holy Scripture I possess. I've simply gained some extra, human emotions. And it occurred to me that my daughter, Karen, will face an even more tragic fate when she learns of my betrayal. Seal, I want you to take care of Karen. Only I have the right to kill my own daughter. When my wife died, I wasn't able to properly enjoy it." He covered his face with one hand, his crimson eyes peering through the gaps between his fingers. A twisted smile slowly spread across his dead fish-like features. In that moment Seal knew, Kyrie Kodomine was likely a far more depraved man than Roa. The infinite reincarnator, the serpent of the void, one of the original 27 dead apostle ancestors. Yet he was also a former priest of the church, and the founder of the prototype for the burial agency. Furthermore, 1,500 years ago, it was his blood that the priest had used against Camelot. His name was Michael Roa Valdemjong. Don't look at me like that. I'm no puppet to be controlled. The true ancestor you want dead. I'll kill him for you. Little girl, you're still far too pure." Kyrie slammed the coffin lid shut again, leaving the girl truly only 14 years old this year trapped inside. Meanwhile, at Mount Enzo, Guinevere, the king of knights, and Irisville had reached the great cavern. They were only waiting for Kiritsugu Amiya to return so the ritual could begin. "Irisville, are you truly going to dissolve yourself into it?" "Guinevere, this has already been decided." With the King of Heroes' withdrawal, his soul was now contained within Irisville, or more accurately, within the Lesser Grail that served as her heart. To summon the Greater Grail, this heart alone was sufficient. Before Kiritsugu arrived, with the King of Knights and Guinevere standing guard, Irisville began to inscribe a magic circle. Despite being of the caster class, Guinevere could only stare blankly at the orthodox magecraft. She couldn't comprehend it, nor could she be certain if the magecraft's effects would align with her expectations. Soon after, Kiritsugu and Mia stepped into the vast expanse of the great cavern. Irisville immediately lay down on the stone altar at the cavern's center. In that instant, the magic circle Irisville had drawn began to glow. Then, the cavern floor itself lit up, revealing the massive magic circle that constituted the Greater Grail within seconds. At that moment, Kiritsugu lit another cigarette. Lying on the altar, having just changed into a white ritual gown, Irisville could no longer suppress her agony. "Guinevere, stop the falsification on Irisville's heart." "Kiritsugu Amiya, are you certain? You're killing Irisville with your own hands." "But if we want her to merge with the Greater Grail, and become the wish-granting core of the Holy Grail system, this is the only way, isn't it? You said that by doing this, the corrupted Holy Grail might be restored, and with Irisville's will guiding it, my wish could be granted correctly." Kiritsugu was insistent, and Irisville was just as determined. If Guinevere tried to stop them before they hit a brick wall, they would only turn against her. Worse, Irisville might foolishly use the command spell specifically preserved to anchor her soul to order Guinevere to commit suicide. "Fine, have it your way," Guinevere said with a sigh. "After you've hit your brick wall, you'd better listen to me." With those words, Guinevere released the falsification on Irisville's body. In that instant, her heart was crushed by the souls of the servants. Irisville died. A hole opened in her chest, and from it, black mud erupted like a fountain, spraying high into the air. Just by looking at the black mud, everyone present knew it was something utterly ominous. "Kiritsugu Amiya," Guinevere said, "I'm temporarily transferring Lia to your command. Do you still believe Irisville can replace Ngramenu within the Greater Grail, and restore its purity?" Irisville was dead, her body and soul devoured by the black mud. On the altar where she had lain, a sacred, radiant cup began to materialize. The black mud that had gushed from her chest now overflowed from this divine vessel. With Irisveel's death, Guinevere's form began to turn translucent, forcing her to step immediately into the black mud. In 2 seconds, the King of Night's command was transferred. 2 seconds later, Guinevere stepped into the spreading mud. Faces of those she had killed, faces she still remembered, flashed through her mind. At the same time, Guinevere heard Irisveel's command spell, "Come to my side." But she didn't see Irisveel immediately. Instead, more whispers echoed in her mind. It seemed Irisveel hadn't lasted even a second before becoming part of the black mud. Chapter 139. Chapter 139. Guinevere, the one blessed by the Holy Grail. 1309 words in Guinevere's eyes, Irisveel had transformed into the surging mud grail. To the King of Knights, Kiritsugu Amiya, and Mia, as Guinevere stepped into the black mud, her body was instantly enveloped. She continued to walk, step by step, toward the Holy Grail. During this time, the black mud stopped overflowing, and instead surged frantically into Guinevere, as if trying to devour her before she could reach the Holy Grail. Kiritsugu Amiya, the King of Knights, said, "Did you really expect Irisveel to overcome this black mud?" The longer they stood in the great cavern, the more they felt the black mud was something that should never be touched. Just 1 minute after Irisveel had transformed into the surging mud grail, Kiritsugu Amiya was already beginning to regret his decision. He suddenly thought he should have personally confirmed the nature of this black mud instead of pinning all his hopes on Irisveel. "Saber," Kiritsugu said, "transfer your contract to Mia. And don't worry too much about Castor. Mia still bears her falsification, which proves she's still alive." Though he had no command spells, the contract sustaining the King of Knights was transferred once more. As a precaution, she would remain on high alert until Guinevere successfully emerged from the black mud, refusing to touch it herself. Pulling Mia back a few steps, they knew that once Kiritsugu had set his mind on something, only death could stop the stubborn man. And so, following Irisveel and Guinevere, Kiritsugu Amiya voluntarily touched the black mud. In that instant, no curses echoed in his ears. He simply found himself back in his bedroom in the old Einsburn castle. Here, Irisveel sat gently by the bedside as Ilia recounted a dream, where she was filled by 7 enormous things, and eventually turned into a cup. "Kiritsugu, you're back. Listen, Ilia had the most absurd dream." Panic, unease, he realized this was merely an illusion, but more importantly, he understood why he had been brought here. If all the world's evil, the corruption within the Holy Grail, had been activated, and Irisveel had successfully taken his place, then he shouldn't be greeted by this scene. Instead, he should have been met with Irisveel's joyous embrace. "Are you Ingram, ain't you? The innocent boy branded with the sin of all the world's evil." Irisveel's smile froze. Ilia dissolved into black mud and vanished. After a moment, Irisveel was still Irisveel, but she now stared at Kiritsugu in silence. "Kiritsugu Amiya, you've prayed to the wrong entity. A true saint was right beside you, yet you pleaded with a counterfeit polluted by me, all the world's evil." After a long silence, Irisveel finally transformed. She became a werewolf-like figure, clad entirely in black, with a red bandana tied around her head. When Irisveel's soul fell into the Holy Grail, he instantly devoured her. She was far less resilient than she had imagined. Yet, all the world's evil struggled to digest the vessel that sustained her soul. His own questions, however, were answered the moment Guinevere stepped into the black mud. Contrary to Guinevere's own assumptions, her ability to withstand the black mud wasn't solely because her heart belonged only to the King of Knights. "I saw it, the experiences of the one who entered the black mud before you." With more than half his consciousness focused on Guinevere, and knowing his own rebirth was now impossible, he lost interest in deceiving Kiritsugu Amiya any further. "Let me tell you the truth. Even an uncorrupted Holy Grail can only grant a wish in a way the wisher believes is feasible. Kiritsugu Amiya, you desire world peace. What feasible method do you believe exists to achieve it? Hey, you understand now, don't you? The Grail's method for granting your wish would be to exterminate humanity, fundamentally eliminating all human conflict. If you want world peace, you must first find the correct path to achieve it. But that brings us back to the original problem. The only truly feasible path is the extinction of humanity. The shadowy wolf figure spoke with mocking disdain. On the other side of his consciousness, he continued to observe the path Guinevere was forging for herself. She was killing again the very people she had killed in life. She met the pleas of those begging for mercy with cold indifference, as if her eyes saw only one thing, bringing the King of Knights the peaceful, prosperous Camelot she desired. Just as true history recorded, after all dissenters were eliminated, Camelot indeed enjoyed over a decade of peace and prosperity under her and the King of Knights' rule. Permanent peace and prosperity. Guinevere had never prayed for such a thing. Yet even with this, she had already earned the Holy Grail's recognition and gained the right to touch it. The Church had given her the Grail, but if the Grail itself hadn't wanted Guinevere to touch it, she never would have gotten close. One who has touched the true Holy Grail has their soul eternally protected by it. How could mere all the world's evil ever defile a true saint who purged God's parasitic pests and effectively founded a new religious sect? Though in this moment, she is not a ruler, but merely a casterclass fabricator of history. The shadowy wolf figure let out a mocking laugh. In reality, Guinevere was already close enough to the surging mud Grail. In this final stretch, the shadowy wolf figure vanished from before Kiritsugu Emiya. He had grasped the true nature of the Grail, but still needed time to process the truth. As for Guinevere, she no longer saw the vassal kings and villains who had fallen to her sword, nor the parasitic monks who had shrieked that the lord's will would punish her. She had stepped into a mountain village she had never seen before. Here, a group of fire-worshipping villagers surrounded an innocent boy branded with the title, "All the World's Evil." By the time Guinevere arrived, his body was already covered in cursed markings. His right eye had been gouged out, his hands and feet severed, and he was being tortured in a manner both brutally cruel and deliberately non-lethal. Some villagers approached, asking Guinevere where she came from and whether the world's evil had diminished now that they had imprisoned all the world's evil. But in response to their questions, "You've lost your minds, but I haven't lost mine. You are all the world's evil. He is merely an innocent monster." With those words, Guinevere swung her sword. She relentlessly slaughtered the seemingly endless villagers, showing no mercy even as exhaustion and weariness set in. An unknown amount of time passed. For some reason, as long as she refused to give up, her stamina remained inexhaustible. After slaughtering every last villager, she walked up to the innocent boy, who could only see with his one remaining eye. She sighed and said, "I'm sorry, I can't save the real you. But I've killed them so many times now you should be satisfied, right? Hey, give Irisville back to me, and you can return to the throne of heroes. To endure so much suffering and still retain your self-awareness, you can be considered a hero in your own right." Knowing Nguemenyu's story, Guinevere could more easily make the right choice. As she watched him remain unresponsive, preparing to send him on his way herself, his body began to dissolve into the motes of light that signaled a heroic spirit's departure. With his last remaining eye, he looked up at her and mouthed the words, "Thank you. Thank you for calling me a hero." All Nguemenyu had ever wanted was to be saved, to be praised. To be called a hero by someone who was undoubtedly a hero herself. In his final moments, he smiled, finally at peace. Chapter 140, Morgan, I really do hate you, my foolish sister. 1325 words. The Holy Grail, it was actually purified. And Guinevere, she actually withstood the black mud and absorbed all of it. Mia, do you think Guinevere is all right? To the onlookers, Guinevere simply walked through the black mud, absorbing it as she went. By the time she reached the Holy Grail and touched it, the Grail had stopped overflowing with black mud. She had fulfilled Irisville's command spell, "Reach my side." In that brief moment, the King of Knights could feel that Guinevere now possessed a living, physical body. However, the thought that this body was constructed from black mud filled her with a faint sense of disgust. Almost simultaneously, Guinevere opened her eyes and reached out to grasp the Holy Grail, just as Kiritsugu Emiya opened his own eyes, his expression now far more world-weary. He had been endlessly tortured by the question of whether to save the many or the few, his heart tormented until it was nearly broken. He had finally come to understand that the Holy Grail was not omnipotent. The only thing it could do was bring Irisville back. Guinevere, can you do it? You're not going to save the world anymore. I don't have that ability. I'm just going to start with small things. Guinevere didn't know the full extent of Kiritsugu Amiya's mental journey, but knowing he had touched the black mud, she could imagine the kind of torture he had endured. As for Kiritsugu's request, if she could bring Irisville back without much effort, why wouldn't she? Holy Grail, please grant Artoria Pendragon and Miyahizo healthy, living bodies. Holy Grail, return Irisville von Einsborn's soul. Even the founding three families of the Holy Grail War held a misconception, that the Grail could only grant a single wish. In reality, if the wishes were relatively small, the 60 years' worth of ley line mana accumulated from Fuyuki City was more than enough to fulfill several. First, Miyahizo's falsification became real. Then, the King of Knights gained a physical body. Finally, the Grail itself began to transform, gradually reshaping into the naked form of Irisville von Einsborn. Guinevere, don't look. We're all girls, what's the big deal? It's not like I'm going to get all touchy-feely with her. Having a physical body was entirely different from not having one. For instance, the King of Knights immediately felt hunger pangs. Her new stomach was empty and desperately needed food. So, what happened to the souls of the nameless servants stored in the Lesser Grail now that the Holy Grail had formed and been used? They were all returned to the Throne of Heroes, forcibly opening a brilliant blue hole in the sky directly above Mount Enzo. Kiritsugu Amiya, are you curious about the route? If you dive in, you might find another way to achieve world peace. Outside the great cavern, the group looked up at the sky, watching the hole shrink. Despite Guinevere's teasing, Kiritsugu merely exhaled a weary smoke ring and said, I told you, I don't have that ability. I'm just going to start with small things. For example, after tonight, I plan to adopt an orphan to give Ilya a companion. I'll work to create a world where Ilya can live happily. Whatever makes you happy. As for the orphan, do you have anyone in mind? Not yet, but Fuyuki City should have an orphanage. Kiritsugu Amiya's surrender was so swift and decisive that it felt unreal to Guinevere, as if he had personally witnessed the world's destruction at his own hands. While the group chatted idly about dismantling the Greater Grail system to end Fuyuki's Holy Grail wars for good, Kirai Kotomine stopped nearby, his gaze fixed on Guinevere, with a mixture of shock and uncertainty. He had just received a message from the Holy Church. Due to the insistence of Britain's Purification Plan faction, the Church was not only retracting its order to attack Guinevere, but was also considering a proposal for her canonization. Of course, the canonization proposal came from the Purification Plan faction. The Roman Orthodox Church and other major and minor denominations across continental Europe vehemently rejected it. But the Holy Church was a joint institution of the Lord's various denominations. With the Purification Plan faction now integrated as a member, the Church had to consider their views, even if certain influential figures disagreed. How ridiculous, Kirai thought. A heretic of heretics, deemed worthy of sainthood simply because she once purged Great Britain's church and restored its purity. She's now seen as the founder of a new denomination, with a chance at canonization now that the Purification Plan faction has grown powerful. However, with the Purification Plan faction in the picture, the conflict between Guinevere and the Holy Church probably won't escalate. Black keys, black robes, crimson eyes. An executor becoming a dead apostle wasn't a big deal. Kirai had watched with his own eyes as the Holy Grail was used, as the pathway to the root coveted by countless mages, and carved open by the souls of 5 servants was sealed shut forever. His gaze returned to Kiritsugu Amiya. But for some reason, looking at Kiritsugu now was like staring at a dead fish. Kirai felt no motivation at all. Frustrated, he decided to retreat. Kirai had changed his bloodline, not his brain. He would wait until Guinevere and the King of Knights had left before making his move against Kiritsugu's family. They have physical bodies now, and the Holy Grail war is over. They should. Saber Caster, will you come with us to pick up Ilya? Kiritsugu asked. We obtained the Holy Grail but used it ourselves. The family head. Of course, we'll go, Caster interrupted. Didn't I say? I'm going to kill his entire family, excluding you all. She reached for the King of Knights' hand and took it. The familiar feel, the familiar warmth, it was just like 1500 years ago. Come to think of it, Guinevere had been fully prepared to fight the altered King of Knights. Who would have thought it would go so smoothly? Still, Guinevere had no intention of wasting the mana accumulated within her replica holy sword. It was almost laughable, even with a physical body, Guinevere still couldn't generate her own mana. Without a mana source, she might truly have to resort to eating children to sustain herself, just like the incarnated king of heroes from her memories. Unlike her, the King of Knights had been granted a physical body by the Holy Grail. She wasn't merely incarnated, she was truly resurrected. Her mana supply was completely self-sufficient. All right, Guinevere declared, we need to visit the Einsburn estate and dismantle Fuyuki's Holy Grail system. But first, let's head back to our place. I want Lia to replenish my magic. She spoke without a hint of shame. Hearing this, only the King of Knights blushed and showed some resistance, still bothered by the fact that Guinevere's body was constructed from black mud. However, the King of Knights' resistance was short-lived. With the Holy Grail war concluded, a certain fairy who had been forced to watch from Avalon could no longer sit still. She wasn't wearing her familiar blue-black, midriff-bearing long dress, nor was her face veiled by sheer gauze. But compared to 1500 years ago, Morgan's ears had become pointed, and her unchanging face now held a hint of a smile. Now, she wore an overly tight white shirt, with a short, blue JK skirt tied around her slender waist. Beneath the hem, which barely covered her thighs, were black stockings of a style Guinevere couldn't quite identify, keeping her warm through the night. Sister Morgan. Sister, why are you dressed like that? Who are you trying to seduce? I really do despise you, my foolish sister. Meanwhile, Irisville pulled out her phone, her gaze darting between the three women. She was certain she had heard the name Morgan. Chapter 141, Chapter 141, Guinevere draws her own doujinshi, end of Volume 2, 1555 words one day, then two. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. During this time, not only had the Holy Grail war come to a close, but Guinevere and the others had also brought Ilya to live with them. Naturally, the Einsburn family had a new head. At that moment, in an ordinary detached house in Fuyuki City, Morgan had just seen off visitors from the purification plan and the clock tower on Guinevere's behalf. Her gaze then locked with her foolish sister's. Foolish sister, is it really so difficult for you to call me sister? The day you stop coveting Guinevere is the day I'll call you sister. Don't think I don't know you gave your memories to the Morgan of another world line. What exactly are you plotting? What am I plotting? To change that world's fate, of course. And while I'm at it, to test whether the path you all abandoned, the path of the Lost Belts, is truly impassable. Foolish sister, by the time I was summoned as a servant to that world, a fantasy tree already existed there. It had the prerequisites, the foundation, to walk that path. But the problem is, for a Lost Belt to persist, it must erode and replace proper human history. At best, you're aiding the enemy. At worst, you're trying to overthrow proper human history itself. Inside the ordinary living room of the detached house, Morgan, dressed in her JK school uniform, but with the clear figure of an adult woman, lay sideways on the sofa, completely ignoring the stern-faced King of Knights. She knew her sister was telling the truth, but so what? Besides, Merlin's warning had already told her that the Lost Belt would ultimately fail. All she wanted was to ask Guinevere for help to have her repay a small debt by saving that other, resolute yet tragic version of herself in that Lost Belt. Everything in that Lost Belt originated from the memories she had sent to the past Morgan. Look, Morgan said, I know what you're worried about. The me here has no right to compete with you for Guinevere. After all, my children are already grown. But the other me in the Lost Belt does. She won't suffer the same misfortune I did. Lying on the sofa, Morgan left much unsaid, but the words she chose were more than enough to fray the King of Knights' nerves. After the initial tension subsided, however, the King of Knights regained the calm composure she had long since cultivated. She had already decided to trust Guinevere, no matter who the rival was. She had simply learned to vent her emotions when necessary, letting Guinevere know what was truly on her mind. So what was Guinevere doing at this moment? Sakura, did you pick up your mother and sister? Yes, big sister Guinevere, I did. Tosaka, is there really no hope for him? I checked him earlier. His body is still alive, but his soul is gone. Bringing him back would require a miracle. The Holy Grail War. But the Fuyuki Greater Grail has already been dismantled. If you have the will and the ability when you're older, you could try building a new Greater Grail system. After this Holy Grail War ends, the path to the route will be fully formed. With all the relevant data sent to the clock tower, Kenneth says many mage families are already planning to construct their own Holy Grail systems. On the second floor, in her bedroom, Guinevere stared at a freshly inked sketch, twirling a pen in one hand while holding her phone to talk with Sakura. With the Holy Grail War over and Ilya safely rescued, Guinevere had only one short-term goal left, to change the public's perception of the King of Knights' court as much as possible. Over the past few days, she'd had the clock tower conduct a thorough investigation. She discovered that the historical accounts she had fabricated had been lost to time. The most widely circulated version now was the Legend of the King of Knights, which portrayed Lancelot as a fairy girl and depicted Guinevere having an affair with her. That version was actually the work of a novelist from several centuries later, and the author had undeniable ties to the Holy Church. Since the original history was lost and the mainstream perception was now shaped by a novel, Guinevere realized it would be much easier to reshape public opinion. Ahem, Sakura, she said, for now, try to visit your mother and sister often. Help them get used to the clock tower, even though you only arrived a few days earlier yourself. Big sister Guinevere, I will, Sakura replied. Thank you for giving me the Pendragon name, and for saving me, for letting me see my mother and sister again. There's no need to thank me. I'm not some demon, and you're so adorable. By the way, do you know someone named Waver Velvet? I've heard about him. He's the one who stole Master Kenneth's holy relic, right? But Master Kenneth was apparently quite satisfied with the thesis he brought back. He's even considering having him marry into the Elmeloy family and get engaged to Miss Rhaenys. Holding the phone, Guinevere now had the pen clamped between her nose and upper lip. She hadn't expected Waver to actually earn someone's admiration and realized her own teasing had inadvertently helped him. She pursed her lips, non-committal. Still, she knew that if Waver's future unfolded as she remembered, he would indeed be worthy of Rhaenys. The problem was that Waver's mind was completely occupied by the King of Conquerors. In matters of romance, he was even more clueless than the King of Knights had been when they first met, back when Artoria still didn't understand the human heart. A spark of inspiration flashed in Guinevere's mind. She knew what kind of doujinshi to draw next. After saying goodbye to Sakura, and reminding her to take care of herself, Guinevere called Kenneth. She asked him to look after Sakura, and mentioned that she would be returning to Great Britain soon, and would visit the clock tower then. All right, I'll start by drawing the story of how Lia and I first met, she muttered to herself. If my art isn't good enough or the story is poorly structured, I'll have the clock tower find professionals to polish it. In the future, even if it doesn't sell well, I'll have it adapted into live action and anime. I'll force-feed it to the public if I have to. But the character designs need to be done carefully. I absolutely can't base them on our real appearances or else. Drawing a doujinshi about myself, this is already weird enough. Yes, Guinevere was drawing a doujinshi about her and the King of Knights, even after she had already tasked the clock tower with finding authors to do the same. When she envisioned something, she felt compelled to work on it herself, at least in part. The pen scratched across the paper, rapidly filling the grid sheets. In the far east of 1990, hand drawing still reigned supreme. In her drawing, the King of Knights remained blonde and green-eyed, but her face was completely different. Guinevere even based her figure on her own mature form. As for herself, she drew a lively, mischievous girl with an orange ponytail and amber eyes. In fact, the version of herself in this doujinshi was entirely based on a character from Honkai Star Rail named Guinevere, the Chinese translation of her own name, Guinevere. Speaking of which, if Guinevere were to check her servant status screen now, it would still be written entirely in English. But if she were to translate her true name into Chinese, it would indeed read Guinevere, that amusing transliteration. Digging deeper into her origins, her primary region was China, with Great Britain as her secondary. With such a true name and origin, she wasn't surprised that Morgan and the clock tower had failed to summon her properly, always getting a distorted version instead. Their summoning rituals had been far too specific. Guinevere of Great Britain. Of course, they would summon another version of her who better matched that specific target. Hey, Guinevere, is this you in the drawing? Back then, I was still. This isn't you at all. Do you really want me to draw a doujinshi using my actual appearance? Besides, I'm not going to copy our story exactly. I'll add plenty of artistic embellishments. In any case, we can't completely deviate from the fictionalized history, right? An arm wrapped around Guinevere's shoulders, and a head rested on her shoulder. But when she tried to turn and kiss the King of Knights, she was met with a look of disgust. It seemed the King of Knights still needed time to accept that Guinevere's body was made of black mud. Or perhaps Guinevere needed to find a new body as soon as possible. But she had already tried. The moment her consciousness left this body, the black mud that formed it would surge forth again. She couldn't solve this problem for now, and would have to wait until she returned to Britain to ask Merlin, or visit the clock tower to consult the old men of the jewels. Chapter 142, Chapter 142, Long Time No See, Great Britain. 1258 words, spy. These are the interlude chapters after Volume 2, and between 3, several days later, in London, Guinevere's group arrived without fanfare. However, with Sakura, Rin, and Kenneth there to greet them, the surface calm belied the turbulent undercurrents already stirring in the shadows. At London Airport, Guinevere, dressed in a simple dress, stretched lazily. She watched the ongoing Cold War between the King of Knights and Lady Morgan, then turned and extended her arms toward the quiet, hesitant Sakura. Sakura, let's spend more time together from now on, so I can truly earn the title of Big Sister you've given me. Smiling, Guinevere stepped forward and embraced Sakura, who wore a matching white dress. Her right hand gently stroked Sakura's silky black hair. Guinevere could sense that Sakura's falsification was gone, yet the shadows lingering in her heart had not returned. The old man of the jewels had accomplished this through methods beyond her comprehension. A small debt owed, Guinevere thought, but it doesn't matter. I'll repay it in full when the opportunity arises. As she held Sakura, Rin watched her with an even more complicated expression. Compared to Sakura, Rin had spent more time with Guinevere both when she was kidnapped by Kiritsugu, and after Tokiomi was left in a vegetative state and Guinevere took her in. Moreover, Sakura had already taken Guinevere's surname, though Guinevere herself had taken her partner's. The name Pendragon carried a historical weight far heavier than Tosaka. It was a burden so immense that it had transformed Sakura, making her quiet, reserved, and a target of envy, yet also fiercely self-reliant. But would Sakura be willing to give it up? For the sake of the big sister who had accepted Korea's request and truly given her a path to a better future, Sakura had no intention of dishonoring the Pendragon name. Moreover, Tokiomi Tosaka, he truly married a fine wife, and had 2 children. Even though he's not completely dead yet, people are already proposing to his wife. Kenneth, dressed in his familiar long blue coat with his slick-back golden hair unchanged, spoke. As a lord of the clock tower, his Holy Grail war hadn't ended in defeat, he had merely withdrawn at Guinevere's suggestion. Upon returning to the clock tower, he was praised for his pragmatism. Of course, only those who could see the future, or observe parallel worlds knew just how incredibly lucky Kenneth had been. It was as if all his misfortune had been absorbed by his Lanceclass servant. Still holding Sakura, Guinevere gestured for the King of Knights to try holding Rin. Ignoring Morgan's disapproving glare, she smiled at Kenneth. She knew what he was implying, he was seeking her opinion. But Guinevere had no desire to interfere, especially since, in her heart, she already believed Tokiomi would never wake up. Kenneth, let her develop freely. But if she truly chooses to abandon the Tosaka name, the person she chooses must not be a deceiver. Your Grace, I understand. Nodding, the two completely ignored Sakura and Rin's opinions. Of the two sisters, Sakura remained silent, while Rin bit her lip, unwilling to let her mother leave her too. Big sister, may I call you that? Of course, Rin. You can call me the same as Sakura. Big sister, my mother. Rin, I am an outsider. You are your mother's daughter. Do you understand what I mean? Besides, you were the one who firmly resolved to inherit the Tosaka house, and willingly accepted your father's magic crest. Rin was intelligent, she needed no further explanation from Guinevere. She simply curled up in the King of Knights' arms, inhaling her pleasant scent. The King of Knights' new body, forged by the Holy Grail, smelled of the pure, clear essence of new life, a very innocent allure. Lia, when will you share a bed with me again? Look, even Sakura doesn't mind. She's even nuzzling my neck. As they spoke and walked, the group arrived at two waiting limousines. But these cars belonged neither to the clock tower nor the El Meloy family. They were assets of the current British royal family. Strictly speaking, the Pendragon bloodline has died out, and subsequent kingdoms bore little relation to the Pendragons. Yet, the legend of the King of Knights remains one of Great Britain's most beloved tales to this day. And yet, Morgan's bloodline, as well as those of many knights, endured. For instance, the handsome young man currently opening the car door would have to call Morgan his great-great-great grandmother. Heh, sister. So you really are that old. Foolish sister. After becoming a heroic spirit, my time froze. It's been 1500 years since my death, but that doesn't make me 1500 years old. You, on the other hand, have lived all this time. You actually that ancient. The King of Knights' cowlick twitched, bobbing up and down. Given the chance, she was growing increasingly fond of such light-hearted jabs. She was trying to shed the burden of her royal status, and become more lively. She had even made a pact with Guinevere to enroll at the clock tower under concealed identities for a while. Sister, what do you think of Guinevere's new book? I don't think much of it. If it's drawn like that, I'll be portrayed as a completely wicked older sister. I'd rather stick with the current grand love quadrangle narrative. Humph, that's precisely why I'm wary of you. Their banter was superficial, but their expressions turned serious. Even setting Lancelot aside, the entanglement between the three of them was an inescapable knot. The first stop on their journey was Mordred's tomb. That child had called them father, queen mother, and mother. Hey, sister, why don't you just settle down with Master Merlin? Guinevere, have you lost your mind? The mere thought of that old bastard makes me sick. Ah, surely it's not that bad. That's because you don't know. He's been locked away in the tower all these years, claiming he'll only come out once all the Artorias are saved. But every fairy knows he got a computer and internet access long ago. He spends all day online, scamming people under the guise of Magimari. And if scamming people wasn't bad enough, why does he have to do it while pretending to be a beautiful girl? Guinevere's mouth twitched. The King of Knights listened, utterly dumbfounded. She couldn't believe her already despicable master could be so utterly shameless. Yet, seeing the sheer contempt on Morgan's face, she couldn't bring herself to believe Morgan was lying. Sister, do you think Master Merlin really has a Mari form? This time, it was Morgan's turn to wear a strange expression. She didn't answer, merely falling silent as she sank into thought. Before long, Sakura and Rin fell asleep in Guinevere's and the King of Knights' arms, respectively. After a considerable while, several cars arrived at Mordred's gravesite. To Guinevere's surprise, the area had been developed into a tourist attraction. Before development began, the clock tower summoned Prince Mordred's heroic spirit to ask for permission. She said she loved this peaceful and prosperous scene, and wished for her tomb to always be bustling with people. Hearing this and recalling the unchangeable Battle of Camlan, Guinevere felt a surge of guilt. The person she had wronged most in her life was this rebellious daughter who had willingly shouldered her fate. Stepping out of the car and walking forward, Guinevere's smile gradually faded. In any case, if I get the chance, I'll cook thousands more meals for her. Chapter 143, Chapter 143, Guinevere, will you become a magical girl? 1383 words. Cornwall, the land where the King of Knights' scabbard and Guinevere's sword were unearthed. It was also Mordred's final resting place. In modern times, however, the tomb was known as the Tomb of the Unknown King, identified as the royal tomb of a lost kingdom from the era of the King of Knights. After weaving through the crowd and passing by a pile of ruined walls, the group stopped before an ordinary tombstone. No life story was recorded on it, no name left behind, only a single line, "I'm sorry, Father." Most of the artifacts unearthed from the tomb had been moved to a nearby museum, leaving this spot with the fewest visitors in the tourist area. Do you think this could be Mordred's tomb? He did wrong his father, after all. Are you kidding? A full set of royal regalia was unearthed from this tomb. After the purification plan inspectors examined it, they immediately declared it the tomb of a king. So it absolutely can't be the Knight of Rebellion's tomb. Besides, the tomb's occupant is said to be a queen, which makes it even less likely to be Mordred. In modern times, it was common knowledge that both the King of Knights and Mordred were male. Guinevere and the King of Knights stood silently, listening. Only after the bystanders had all dispersed under the effect of a dispel bystanders' spell did they quietly kneel down, personally tidying the bouquets and weeds before the tombstone. Lady Morgan, did Mordred ever wish to be brought back to life? She said this era is no longer hers. She only hopes that if she's ever summoned alongside you one day, she can apologize again for failing to protect Camelot, and show you how much she's grown. Rising from the graveside, Guinevere was once again at a loss for words. But no matter what, servants were merely aspects of their true selves on the throne of heroes. Even if she and the King of Knights remained in the modern era, Mordred still had a chance to fulfill her wish. In fact, Guinevere had already thought of a Holy Grail war where Mordred was summoned. If she used the Holy Grail again, she could even obtain a normal body for herself. Fate/Apocrypha, the Great Holy Grail War, the Igmalenia family in Romania. The thoughts raced through Guinevere's mind, but she knew that the world of Fate/Apocrypha was likely a different timeline from her own. It was just a passing fancy. Still, she realized that once she made some progress in changing public opinion, she could organize a Holy Grail war herself. She could absolutely make Mordred's wish come true herself. Yeah, let's do this in the future. Guinevere voiced her plan aloud. The King of Knights hesitated for a moment before nodding firmly. As for Morgan, she blinked in surprise, then smiled and extended a hand toward Guinevere. You mentioned a 7-on-7 Great Holy Grail War, didn't you? Count me in. Come to think of it, if we include these two little ones and drag in that little child you have in Fuyuki, our Camelot faction will already have 6 servants. And if we bring Merlin along, wouldn't that be a bit unfair? What are you planning to lose? Morgan scoffed. As for the other team of masters willing to participate, we can just offer them a small share of the Spirit Tomb's output. Even 1% of what you once contracted for would have those mages flocking to us. Morgan's excitement was palpable, her lipstick-coated lips seeming to shine. She clearly thought this would be an excellent game. Guinevere committed Morgan's ideas to memory, planning to refine the details later when she returned. The Albion Spirit Tomb's output share. Guinevere didn't even know what it produced. Of course, it produces everything a mage could ever desire. You must understand, it's the physical passage the fairies use to travel to the reverse side of the world, and the only confirmed dragon's graveyard on the planet. Guinevere, you only need to know that the share you signed for is practically infinite. And that's not even counting the Pendragon family's deposit, which has been accumulating for 1,500 years. The one and only dragon's heart is also currently Pendragon property. Merlin said you'll need it in the future. A cunning glint flashed in Morgan's eyes. She had already made her expectations for Guinevere crystal clear to the others, but the time wasn't yet right. In another world, the human order salvation team known as Chaldea had yet to even defeat the demon god king. That doctor who had sacrificed everything yet still couldn't let go of humanity, was still being tricked by Merlin daily, hoping only to glean some small comfort from the Mage of Flowers. So Merlin really is the bastard. As Morgan's thoughts drifted, she stumbled upon another unpleasant memory. Fortunately, she had a way to find solace now while Guinevere and the King of Knights continued to tend to Mordred's grave. She could thoroughly ruffle Sakura and Rin's hair. Guinevere, is this enough? It'll have to do. They say Mordred's remains were moved from here the day the sword and scabbard were unearthed. I beat up Merlin and all the fairies in Avalon to bring her remains back to my side. Mordred is my daughter too. Before Mordred's grave, her father, Queen Mother, and Mother gazed one last time at the epitaph she had chosen. With a collective sigh, they turned and walked back to their car. After tending to the grave, if they weren't also visiting the King of Knights' cenotaph, or Guinevere's own skeletal tomb deep in the Welsh mountains, they could head back to the clock tower. Wait, Guinevere suddenly said. You're in Avalon, and Leah's and Mordred's bodies are there too. Does that mean my corpse is the only one still buried out here? And I just remembered that thing you took back after I died, can you return it to me now? What happens after death is unpredictable, but Guinevere had returned to life. It was only right that she reclaim what was hers and fulfill the promises she'd made in her previous life. I'll give it back to you later. I'm going to forge it into a true noble phantasm. As for that gem of yours I entrusted to the mineralogy department, the old man of the jewels took it back. He used it as a prototype to create 2 staff-type magecraft mystic codes. How should I put it, your gem and those 2 mystic codes are worlds apart, but their fundamental principle is the same, drawing mana from parallel worlds. Morgan tilted her head, brushing a lock of lake blue hair from her ear. She continued, are any of you interested in becoming magical girls? As she spoke, the group had already settled back into the limousine, which was now heading back toward the clock tower. According to Kenneth, who had spoken to them as they boarded, the old man of the jewels had no interest in meeting them but had left a few messages. The old man of the jewels said he agrees with the great mage Merlin's assessment. The trajectory of that world indeed affects the entirety of proper human history's parallel worlds, and some level of assistance or intervention is necessary. He also said that the pathway to that parallel world can be opened using the old gift he modified for you. The King of Knights was still utterly bewildered by the talk of magical girls and the old man of the jewels' messages. Guinevere, however, was beginning to understand. After all, she too could see the future. She hated the feeling that her path had already been decided for her. Guinevere, Morgan said, Merlin also has a message for me to pass on to you. He said that whether you go or not won't affect Chaldea's ultimate victory. However, there will be some regrets you won't be able to mend, and some painful blows he'll just have to endure. He said he understands human emotions now and it's your fault. He wants you to take responsibility for it. Hearing this in the car, Guinevere found it rather strange, but thankfully, the King of Knights never saw men as a threat. Chapter 144, Chapter 144, Another World, Chaldea 1362 words. The Human Order Continuity Security Organization, Chaldea's a massive observatory, funded 30% by various world nations and 70% solely by the Animusphere mage family. Unlike most observatories, it didn't observe extraterrestrial bodies. Instead, it monitored the entire planet's past, present, and future. Through the combined efforts of Merlin and the old man of the jewels, they had confirmed the existence of this organization in another parallel world. They had witnessed the extinguishing of human civilization's light, and observed the struggles of Chaldea's survivors as they fought to reclaim humanity's future. Their willingness to intervene stemmed from Merlin's inability to foresee a deeply painful alternative possibility within a certain singularity. In that possibility, Guinevere was just an ordinary Guinevere, with no unique traits. She truly became entangled with Lancelot, setting the stage for the Round Table's collapse. At the Battle of Camlan, the King of Knights killed Mordred and, gravely wounded, dragged herself to a lakeside. Like countless other versions of herself, she asked Bedivere to return the holy sword. However, Bedivere disobeyed. Unable to bear seeing his king meet her end, he refused to return the holy sword to Avalon. Afterward, the King of Knights miraculously survived, losing only her memories. Tragically, she could now only wield the holy lance, gradually merging with it until she became the true Lion King, a being who had lost her humanity, her heart completely consumed by divinity. For nearly 800 years, the Lion King's army occupied Jerusalem, turning everything into a desert through constant warfare. To survive and escape the desert's torment, the humans of that singularity had no choice but to seek refuge in the new holy city, Camelot, hoping to pass the Lion King's holy selection and become citizens. But they won't make it through. The Knights of Camelot will simply kill them. So Guinevere, Merlin began, his voice echoing through the private connection, do you truly not wish to save the one who, across countless parallel worlds, could be called the most pitiful version of her? In a lavish and elegant lounge within the clock tower's mineralogy department, Merlin was speaking privately with Guinevere and the King of Knights. Intervening in that singularity was his idea, but whether they would actually go depended on Guinevere's own will. As for doing it himself, he still vividly remembered the grand failure of his first intervention 1500 years ago, a memory that left him with a lasting psychological scar. For Merlin, if words alone could solve the problem, then words alone were the best course of action. Merlin, I can do this, Guinevere replied, but how do I get there? Am I really supposed to rely on this rainbow gem, modified by the Old Man of the Jewels? The gift, originally from the Old Man of the Jewels and kept by the mineralogy department after her death, had been returned to Guinevere upon her arrival. Just as Morgan had said, it had undergone further modifications by the Old Man. It was now a prototype mystic code, modified, a replica he had recreated after using its principles to forge the mystic codes Ruby and Sapphire. Unlike those two mystic codes, Guinevere's rainbow gem lacked an artificial spirit. It was an inanimate object that responded only to programmed commands. Fortunately, its functionality was no less potent. In other words, if Guinevere wished, she could indeed transform into a magical girl and gain the immense magecraft abilities granted by the rainbow gem. With this, her claim to the caster class would be truly legitimate. Ahem, Merlin coughed. That was the original plan. But since you absorbed all the black mud from the Fuyuki Holy Grail, transferring that near-infinite mana has proven more difficult than anticipated beyond our projected capabilities. But the Old Man of the Jewels' message? That was just a message. He can't see the future, he can only make educated guesses by observing parallel worlds. Ahem, to put it simply, he often misses the finer details. Does he know you talk about him like that? Ahem, ahem, ahem. It's fine. I'm not leaving Avalon anyway. The communication was conducted via a computer, using a video call slightly ahead of its time. Thus, Guinevere and the King of Knights could see his appearance, unchanged for 1500 years. Merlin was still the handsome, gentle mage of flowers they remembered. In short, Merlin continued, directly teleporting your physical body is too difficult, and Leah would likely be unhappy about your departure. So I plan to create a false return to the throne of heroes for you. I'll transmit your current memories back to your original heroic spirit on the throne. Then, I'll use your rainbow gem to contact my counterpart in that parallel world. Hopefully, he can perform a heroic spirit summoning ritual and summon the version of you who now possesses these memories. Listening and thinking, Guinevere didn't find the plan simple at all. However, it offered a significant advantage. If successful, she could work in that singularity without neglecting her duties here. After all, as servants, they were all her, yet they were also mere aspects of the original heroic spirit on the throne journeys, that would eventually be integrated back into the main body. Merlin, the King of Knights, interjected, "Can I go too?" "No, I mean, can my memories also be sent back and summoned by your other self in that world?" Hot pants and a hoodie. The King of Knights had genuinely grown fond of this casual attire. Her question wasn't born from fear of Guinevere cheating on her, she simply wanted to save that most pitiful version of herself. Of course, since that was also Artoria, she did harbor a subtle worry. An awkward silence fell. Merlin didn't refuse, but he had no confidence that the singularity could accommodate another Artoria. He could only scratch his head and say, "Lia, I'll do as you ask, but whether it succeeds or not will depend entirely on luck. Besides, I'll need to study this carefully with Guinevere to figure out how to summon her accurately. You know we've failed to summon her correctly for the past 1500 years. They still had plenty of time. The journey to the singularity in the other parallel world wasn't urgent. Merlin had many preparations to make, and Guinevere faced an endless stream of troubles. At the tomb, Guinevere had just mentioned the Great Holy Grail War to Morgan. By the time they returned to the clock tower, rumors were already spreading like wildfire. Even Kenneth was willing to participate in another Holy Grail war for a share of the Albion Spirit Tomb. He wasn't the only one. Numerous mage families were secretly mobilizing. For them, if the Pendragons were willing to offer shares of the Spirit Tomb, they wouldn't need to resort to excessive scheming and risk the wrath of the entire clock tower. As for the preliminary preparations for the Holy Grail War, setting up a Holy Grail system on a ley line and constructing a Greater Grail, several families had already requested to handle the task themselves. After all, securing the right to build the foundational infrastructure would give them leverage to demand participation slots and make additional preparations. Lia, Guinevere explained, they're not just after the Spirit Tomb shares. Since the Fuyuki Holy Grail War ended, all mages have confirmed that opening a pathway to the route via a Holy Grail system is indeed feasible. However, very few mage families in the world possess the independent capability to construct a Holy Grail system. The relevant magecraft knowledge is currently under the dual control of the Clock Tower and the Holy Church. To host their own Holy Grail War, the primary prerequisite is still obtaining permission from both organizations. Mineralogy Department. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Flickering lights cast the shadow of two people holding hands. Morgan was arranging for people to handle the Great Holy Grail War, while they, Guinevere, and the King of Knights were heading to the Clock Tower's Academic Affairs office to register as transfer students into the most basic class. The King of Knights was genuinely interested in experiencing the life of an ordinary girl. Chapter 145. Chapter 145. Returning Memories to the Throne of Heroes, 1380 words, London, England. The Clock Tower. As the successor to the Magecraft Academy of 1,500 years ago, the modern Clock Tower placed even greater emphasis on student recruitment than Guinevere remembered. However, the Clock Tower remained a mage institution, and its obsession with bloodlines had only intensified over time. Waver led them to register, but the two used Guinevere's original surname. When they entered the most basic classroom, the new students only gave them a second glance because of their beauty. As for why they didn't join the El Meloy classroom, it was an elite class. After briefly skimming through Kenneth's lesson plans, Guinevere and the King of Knights knew they wouldn't understand a thing. In this basic classroom, equivalent to a first-year class, outstanding students assisted with teaching the fundamentals of magecraft. The instructor for this session was none other than 5-year-old Rhaenys. "Hello, Miss Castor, Miss Artoria." Not only their names but also their appearances and ages had been disguised. Guinevere and the King of Knights both maintained the appearance of 14-year-olds. As for Castor, it was, of course, a reference to her class. The King of Knights used her real name, Artoria, because those unfamiliar with her wouldn't recognize it. "Hello to you too, Master Rhaenys." The tiny girl was remarkably slender, with the same blonde hair and blue eyes as Kenneth. She even wore a knee-length dress in the same color as his attire. In contrast, Guinevere and the King of Knights wore the Clock Tower's female uniform, an orange top, black shorts, and matching black stockings. Naturally, they also wore the black, wide-sleeved robes bearing the clock tower's insignia. After exchanging greetings and introducing themselves to the class, they nodded to Sakura, Rin, and a little girl with familiar blonde drill-like hair who were also in the classroom. The two who looked the oldest naturally took seats, at the very back of the lecture hall. However, once the lecture actually began, only the King of Knights was paying close attention. Rhaenys was lecturing on the clock tower's origins and history, as well as what students could expect to learn there. Master, is that really true? That 1500 years ago, when mages were being persecuted by the church, the Kingdom of Camelot opened its borders to them and established the first magecraft classroom. This is a history known to every mage from a long-established lineage. The level of detail you know, however, depends on how deep that lineage runs. What I'll be sharing with you is merely the basics. On the lecture platform, Rhaenys sat on a tall stool even taller than the lectern with her arms crossed. Kenneth's volumen hydrargyrum, which he had lent her, had formed a humanoid shape, and was writing on the blackboard for her. Therefore, I want you all to remember this: every student who chooses to study at the clock tower owes a debt to the Pendragon bloodline. At the back of the classroom, the King of Knights' face flushed slightly. She nudged Guinevere with her elbow, but the person she nudged was still engrossed in her drawing. It had only been a few days, yet she had already drawn up to their grand wedding. Guinevere, how about I help you draw? I should have a hand in fulfilling that wish too. Attending class was something the King of Knights looked forward to. Therefore, talking in class and getting caught by the master was an essential part of the experience that simply had to be savored. As even Sakura couldn't help but turn her head to stifle a laugh, Guinevere was called upon. She was asked to recount how the mages and the Kingdom of Camelot first formed their bond. Should I tell them? Can I tell them? Guinevere began to narrate the story of the snow disaster, mentioning the family head who had first contracted with her. While they were enjoying this most basic of magecraft lessons, in the reverse side of the world, within Avalon, the old geezer Merlin was truly working hard. He was conferring with his counterpart from another world, discussing the optimal point in time to send Guinevere. Should they drop her directly into the divine realm of the Round Table, Camelot Singularity, or should they have her establish contact with Chaldea first? Past, present, and future existed simultaneously, yet time still flowed linearly forward. In the other Merlin's world, it was already the year 2016. I doubt she'd have any interest in staying at Chaldea permanently, would she? But Morgan still needs her help with something. The best-case scenario would be to keep that aspect of her there indefinitely. Would she agree to that? She owes Morgan far too many favors. Communication with parallel worlds was conducted through the computer in front of Merlin, but it had already been modified by the old man of the jewels. Everyone has their strengths, and observing parallel worlds was not Merlin's forte. A minute, a second, a day, a week. Time flowed by as everyone bustled with activity. Once Merlin had everything prepared, he first sent a lock of Guinevere's own Hera catalyst guaranteed to summon her to the other side. Then, he initiated another video call with Guinevere, and remotely guided Morgan through the process of restoring her memories. Sister, are you sure this thing can really be sent back to the Throne of Heroes? Returning the memories relied on Guinevere's second noble phantasm, which used a fabricated soul she constructed as its foundation. The item Morgan wanted Guinevere to take with her was the magic sealing necklace, a gift Guinevere had given her, which Morgan had returned, only to reclaim it after her death. Of course, Morgan had since fused the necklace with the only dragon heart unearthed from the Albion spirit tomb, transforming it into a genuine noble phantasm. When this item was integrated into Guinevere's fabricated soul, it greatly enhanced the soul's authenticity, and even granted Guinevere the dragon attribute. You just need to trust me. This time, it wasn't just Guinevere whose memories were being returned, the King of Knights had also requested to join. The process was guided by Merlin, presided over by Morgan, and observed by Kenneth and other lords from the clock tower. As the magic circle flared with light, a small world void formed somewhere beneath the clock tower. Guinevere's and the King of Knights' fabricated souls, carrying their memories, swiftly returned to the throne of heroes and successfully merged with their original souls. After sitting idly for 1500 years, I've finally reunited with Leah. Deep within the counterforce, in the throne of heroes, at the seat belonging solely to Guinevere, her memories returned. She immediately rolled around in satisfaction on her enormous velvet bed. At the same time, she held up the necklace Morgan had returned, let out a soft chuckle, and smiled. Now that I have this, does it count as another noble phantasm? The fairy kingdom of Great Britain? I get it, you foolish sister. I'll definitely save the other you. The throne of heroes is a sealed space from which each heroic spirit cannot leave on their own. However, the size and decor of the space within can be altered entirely according to the will of its master. For instance, Guinevere had decorated her space like a true otaku's den. Aside from the large bed in the center, the four walls were lined with all sorts of figurines. 50% were various versions of Artoria, 30% were Mordred, 10% were Morgan, and the final 10% depicted other important people from her memories. Here, Guinevere had also requested a computer, and had reproduced and stored all the works from her previous life's memories. She reviewed her past, rolled around on her bed, and waited for a future summoning contract. Since the throne of heroes exists outside of time, Guinevere soon heard a voice calling her name. This time, she and her king of knights would correct the story of another king of knights. Everything was supposed to unfold this way. Alright, pseudo-servant summoning is an essential part of the Fate series experience. I am Artoria now. Then, as the King of Knights, Artoria, I shall raise the banner of rebellion against you, Lion King Artoria. Chapter 146, Chapter 146, Good morning, Mash Kirilite 12-13 words, confirming body temperature, confirming the five senses. Just as I can objectively understand, I will speak my name aloud. Mash Kirilite. In another world, at Chaldea, the Organization for the Preservation of Human Order and humanity's last bastion, Mash woke up just as she always did. Several months had passed since the light of humanity's future was extinguished, since the familiar Professor Lev caused a massive explosion in Chaldea, leaving the rookie Ritsuka Fujimaru as the only available master. In that time, she and this new master had overcome 5 major singularities together. Oh, right. What is a singularity? Past, present, and future exist simultaneously. The key nodes in human history are fixed and immutable, otherwise, the human order would be incinerated, and humanity's future would vanish. A singularity is an immutable node where a major anomaly has occurred. Of course, the singularities Chaldea had to repair were not naturally occurring. They were artificially created by the demon god King Goetia, who dispatched demon god pillars to cause them. Nearly all the singularities Chaldea had repaired so far had been of this nature. Ding dong. The doorbell rang. It was her trusted senpai, reminding her to gather in the command room. Senpai, I'll be right there. In her pure white room, various souvenirs and fresh flowers were displayed, as if the artificial human known as Mash Kirilite was gradually being filled with memories, developing a humanity uniquely her own. As she answered, Mash continued to comb her slightly split-ended, neck-length pink hair. She slowly removed the non-prescription glasses she had started wearing after becoming a demi-servant. Crossing her hands above her head, she stretched backward with a deep exhale. The movement caused the fabric of her black miniskirt to tighten slightly as the gentle curves of her chest became more pronounced. With that single response and a long stretch, Mash Kirilite was fully revitalized. She bent over, pulling on a pair of black tights under her miniskirt. Just before leaving, she grabbed the short work jacket from the head of her bed. When she opened the metal hatch door and met the gaze of the orange-haired girl waiting outside, she flashed her brightest smile. Good morning, senpai. Good morning, Mash. The girl's lower half was dressed similarly to Mash's a miniskirt and black tights while her upper body was clad in the white Chaldea master uniform, which resembled a straitjacket. They met, smiled, and exchanged greetings. Then, the master named Ritsuka buried her face in Mash's chest, forcefully inhaling the fresh, clean scent of her little eggplant. Helpless and flustered, but long accustomed to it, Mashkirilite knew her master was just this kind of playful person. But before Ritsuka could finish her antics, a broadcast crackled to life, urging them to hurry. It was Dr. Romani, Chaldea's current director. Several months ago, a massive explosion caused by Professor Lev had left Chaldea, with only Ritsuka, as a viable master, and had killed nearly 200 staff members. As a result, Dr. Romani now held the highest position. Initially, many had doubted his capabilities, but now they were on the verge of tackling the sixth singularity. Alright, the singularity we're targeting this time is located in Jerusalem, in the year 1237 AD. Historically, this was when the Ninth Crusade failed, and the Church lost its influence over Jerusalem. The Holy City in the Middle East instantly became a powder keg of conflict among various factions. But don't worry, Da Vinci-chan will be joining you on this exploration. Miss Magimari also sent me a message saying she'll provide Chaldea with extra support for this mission. With orange hair, a green shirt, and a white lab coat, the man had a gentle, almost gullible-looking face. This was Dr. Romani Archaman, Chaldea's current director, known simply as Doctor. However, only one servant in Chaldea currently knew the truth. This gullible-looking man was none other than the servant summoned by the former director in this world's fourth Holy Grail War. His true identity was the King of Mages, Solomon, the pinnacle of all mages. But after the Fourth Holy Grail War, he had wished to become human. As long as he chose not to wear his crown, he was a truly ordinary mortal. And as an ordinary human, he genuinely loved humanity. To reclaim its future, he worked himself to exhaustion day after day, having not slept well in a very long time. Doctor, we know you're under a lot of stress, and it's normal to chat with a virtual idol every night, but please don't take her reassurances seriously. Because they didn't know Dr. Romani's true identity, ordinary Chaldea staff members felt free to tease him. They meant no harm. Their underlying message was simply a wish for him to get more rest. What virtual idol? Magimari is real. Anyway, once you reach this singularity, you'll definitely receive extra support. That's what Magimari told me. Yeah. Even Ritsuka was just humoring him now. Only Mash and Da Vinci-chan were listening seriously. But after the commotion in the command room subsided, they all knew this exploration would be fraught with difficulty. Mashkirilite and Ritsuka Fujimaru, one a seemingly ordinary, fragile homunculus, the other a completely normal human, lay down in the Spiritron transfer device as naturally as ever. This device enabled time travel, and it was precisely because so few could withstand such journeys that Ritsuka Fujimaru was humanity's last master. Mash, as a demi-servant, could use the device through a loophole. Da Vinci-chan, being a servant herself, had no issues with it. When Chaldea first designed the Spiritron transfer device, they had anticipated that mages transferred would only have their physical bodies, lacking any means of defense. Thus, servants were essential as their armed escorts. The device sealed shut, the countdown began, and the familiar roller coaster-like sensation washed over them. Meanwhile, far away, outside the tower where this world's Merlin had secluded himself. As an endless sea of flowers swayed, Merlin personally completed a servant summoning. A golden-haired young woman slowly materialized within the crimson magic circle. Avalon rejected Guinevere, denying her sole refuge within its borders. Because of this, during the summoning process, the King of Knights who should have been summoned alongside her was forced to relinquish her own body, offering it to Guinevere as a shell. Leah's face, a ruler-class container. I'm Jeanne d'Arc. As the light of the magic circle faded, Merlin's jaw dropped wide enough to swallow a goose egg. Before him stood a figure with Artoria's face, but dressed in unfamiliar attire. Her first words only deepened his shock. Even though this world's Merlin was far less emotionally expressive than his otherworld counterpart, he couldn't help but press a hand to his forehead, wondering if accepting help from another world had been the right decision. Whatever. Well then, hello, Miss Guinevere. Hello, Merlin. Should I say nice to meet you for the first time, or long time no see? She wore an incredibly ornate nun's habit. Perhaps because their destination was Jerusalem, Guinevere had been summoned in her ruler aspect. This manifestation was based on her historical feat of purging the Great Britain Church, an act that had brought about the purification plan ahead of its time. Chapter 147, Chapter 147, Leah and I are one in body and soul. 12-11 words. A sea of flowers, a towering spire, Merlin. And now, standing before him, was Guinevere, who had, in a sense, formed a master-servant contract with him. After their initial exchange, a silence fell between them. Guinevere wasn't sure what else to say, while Merlin simply gazed at her. At Artoria's face and recalled how this world's Artoria had willingly surrendered her body. As he observed her, a faint smile gradually touched his lips. It truly is our first meeting, Miss Guinevere. Thank you for answering my summons. He had the same appearance, wore the same Mage of Flowers robes, and was just as much of a recluse. The only difference was that this Merlin's emotions were far more muted, still withdrawn due to the tragic end this world's Artoria had met. I assume you know why I summoned you. Guinevere glanced around. It was her first time in Avalon, but aside from the towering spire and the endless sea of flowers planted by Merlin, there wasn't much else to see. The only noteworthy sights were the few fairies who darted away at her approach and the scarred, petrified statue of Guinevere. Centuries ago, after the Battle of Camlan in this world, the King of Knights entrusted the Holy Sword to Guinevere, hoping he would return it to Avalon. But Guinevere disobeyed the king's command. This failure prevented the king from finding peace, transforming her into a mindless undead spirit wandering the world. This state persisted until this world fell into the Holy Grail, causing a historical anomaly that Chaldea would later identify as the Sixth Singularity. As for Guinevere, after disobeying his king, and losing track of her, he too wandered the world. Consumed by endless regret, his soul and body gradually withered away until he turned to stone. Merlin eventually found him and brought him back to Avalon, where he waited for a chance to atone for his mistake. Now that time had come. The King of Knights, wielding the Holy Lance, had defeated the warring factions near Jerusalem and burned the holy city to ashes. From those ruins, she had raised a new holy city, Camelot. Meanwhile, the restorers of the human order, Chaldea's master and servants, had recently arrived at that very singularity. Guinevere looked from Merlin to the petrified Guinevere and nodded seriously. She shared what she knew, then waited for this world's Merlin to elaborate. But to her disappointment, Merlin added nothing. He simply walked with her to stand before the petrified Guinevere. This time, let me go help Chaldea myself. I don't believe that is Guinevere's wish. Even if his body and soul will be burned away on this journey, regardless of success or failure. This is his atonement. Standing before the statue, Guinevere had known the answer before she even asked. She had only asked because she didn't want to see Guinevere truly burn away. Manifested as a ruler-class servant, Guinevere no longer possessed her noble phantasm of falsification. She couldn't save Guinevere. Now, standing before the statue, she carefully reviewed her own status panel. True name, Guinevere Pendragon class, ruler alignment, lawful good parameters, strength, A+. Agility, B. Endurance, B. Noble phantasm, A class skills, magic resistance, A+. True name discernment, A. Servant sense, B. Independent action, A. Due to not being summoned by the Holy Grail, or the counterforce, independent manifestation has been downgraded to independent action. Personal skills, Saint, A. As one chosen by the Holy Grail, she can choose to create an A-rank Holy Shroud or increase the rank of any one class skill or personal skill by one level. Judgment, A. Can pass judgment on a target with sufficient evidence. If deemed guilty, the target is marked as evil, increasing the damage they receive and forcing them into introspection. Executioner, EX, executes sinners and those already judged. Wields the power of flames and is immune to fire damage. First Noble Phantasm, Sword of Destined Judgment, type, Anti-Fortress Noble Phantasm. Second Noble Phantasm. My heart holds no God, my will is the divine will. Type, Anti-Unit Noble Phantasm. Max targets, 1 description, as a mortal, act as the divine will. Grants the user A-rank divinity, increases damage against all evil-aligned servants, and greatly enhances base parameters. Hey, Guinevere, can I wake Bedivere now? Guinevere had been staring at the status panel for some time. Merlin had waited patiently, but all things must eventually move forward. He finally spoke, and without waiting for a reply, stepped forward and began casting the awakening magecraft on Bedivere. Stone dust trickled down as the moss withered away. The statue softened, its surface regaining the luster of human skin. In moments, Bedivere was restored to his human form. Yet even in his unconscious state, his face was etched with anguish. O wanderer, rusted and worn, on the verge of losing the trinity of body, soul, and spirit. Fulfill your sinner's pact. This is truly your final chance. Magecraft could only awaken the body, awakening the soul and spirit required only words. When Merlin's words echoed directly in Bedivere's soul, his eyelids finally began to tremble. Soon, he opened his emerald green eyes. Confusion and anguish gave way to gratitude upon seeing Merlin, then to wide-eyed shock as he saw Guinevere, his mouth falling open. He must have wanted to speak, to cry out, "My king," but the shock rendered him speechless. A smile, a pang of pity, a memory of the Bedivere from her own world. After a soft sigh, Guinevere truly channeled the King of Knights, adopting the most regal expression she could muster. Calm yourself, Sir Bedivere. Guinevere would claim to be the foremost expert on the King of Knights, and would draw her sword against anyone who dared deny it. Bedivere truly saw the familiar king of his heart. He pressed a hand to his face, nearly weeping, and instinctively performed a knight's salute to Guinevere. Should she accept this salute? Though he was Bedivere and she was disguised as the King of Knights, he was not the knight of the king she impersonated. Guinevere turned aside, avoiding Bedivere's salute. Just as Bedivere froze on the verge of shutting down completely, Guinevere spoke directly, earnestly explaining the situation. I am not your king. I am Artoria Pendragon from another world. Guinevere's good reputation existed only in her own world, and even there, it was confined to a very small circle. In this world, she lacked even that. Rather than explain the story of her world to Bedivere a tale she foresaw having to repeat countless times, Guinevere decided it was simpler to just call herself Artoria. After all, she was currently using Artoria's body, and partners were one and the same. She was sure her Leah wouldn't mind. Hearing Guinevere's declaration, Merlin paused for a moment but didn't expose her. Bedivere, after his own moment of stunned silence, shifted his salute to the proper knight's bow for his king. This time, Guinevere did not step aside. Then, King of Knights from another world, how should I address you? Just call me ruler. This time, Guinevere let her stern expression soften, revealing a smile that this world's Bedivere had never seen on Artoria's face. He was captivated. Chapter 148, Chapter 148, A Tale of Many Me's and Many Leah's 1267 words. Miss Ruler, are you truly not going to conceal yourself at all? Year 1237 AD, Jerusalem region. After Guinevere and Bedivere were sent out of Avalon, and arrived in this so-called singularity, Guinevere's first reaction was that she was about to faint from the heat. Scorching sun, yellow sand, high temperatures. Moreover, to prevent sunburn, she couldn't wear light clothing, and had to endure a thick cloak while traveling. Thus, after just a short walk, Guinevere used her saint skill to create clothing from the holy shroud that granted a cooling effect. It was the same outfit her Leah had recently favored, hot pants, a thin shirt, and a short jacket. However, instead of blue, Guinevere chose her preferred color, black. Now, while Bedivere remained clad in armor and a hooded robe, she skipped ahead like a young girl. Unaffected by the blazing sun and heat, Guinevere had become a tourist enjoying the sights. Sir Bedivere, does this outfit truly not suit me? No, Miss Ruler. What I mean is, with your appearance so exposed, your beauty will likely attract trouble. Also, my name is now Lucius. I know, Sir Bedivere, Guinevere replied, but I believe your concealment is pointless. As a king, I have no intention of living like a rat scurrying through the streets. Sir Bedivere, hold your head high. You made a mistake, but you still possess the qualities and glory of a knight. Since you are a knight, then live like one. She turned, clasping her hands behind her back and leaning forward slightly, a natural smile on her face. Seeing this Artoria speak such words, Bedivere's heart skipped another beat. He instinctively wanted to obey, to say, "Yes, your majesty," but guilt seized him. The reality that the person before him was not his king crashed down, waking him from his daze. He bowed in thanks but said no more, resolving in his heart to protect this smile as well. Seeing his silence and refusal, Guinevere pouted but didn't press the matter. She knew she couldn't ease his burden of guilt just yet. Under the scorching sun, across the seemingly endless desert, the two travelers continued their journey. They followed the route Merlin had given them, steadily advancing toward the center of this lost belt. They walked in silence as if gripped by boredom. But in reality, Guinevere would pause every so often, take out the rainbow gem Merlin had given her, and toy with it. In another world, that Merlin couldn't transfer her while she was burdened with all the black mud, but he could send this creation of the old man of the jewels here. Through this item she, in this world, could communicate via text with people from the other world. They, in turn, were curious about what she saw and heard in this one. Besides, Guinevere found the idea of talking to herself quite strange. Furthermore, the Merlin of this world had integrated her contract into the gem, allowing her to sustain her existence by drawing on its endless mana. The reason for this was simple: this world's Merlin still refused to leave his tower, and Sir Bedivere, already near the end of his life, couldn't possibly support her. "Hey, Leah," she muttered to the gem, "if we were both standing in front of you, who would you rather cuddle with? I'm not made of black mud, you know." A reply instantly appeared, "Other me, shut up. Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. You're lucky enough to reside in Leah's body, be more grateful. Strictly speaking, the version on the throne of heroes is the true body, and all others are mere offshoots. Yet, while these offshoots are fundamentally the same person, they are also functionally independent individuals." Guinevere found it unsettling to admit, but she wasn't the only one who could be summoned in different aspects. In fact, her Leah would surely have even more facets than she did. At this thought, a possibility flashed through her mind: several versions of herself and several versions of Leah, all in the same room, and then... Ahem, what else could happen? Of course, they'd all merge into one. Some things were best not dwelled upon. The more you thought about them, the stranger they became. That was just the nature of heroic spirits and servants. Putting away the gem and ending her conversation with her other self for now, ruler Guinevere felt a pang of jealousy. Here she was, trekking through the scorching sun, while her caster self was enjoying academy life with Leah at the clock tower. "That's why I shouldn't think about it too much," she told herself. "All I need to know is that we are all me. And besides, while my other self might get on Leah's nerves, I'm united with Leah every single second." Hee hee. These thoughts remained in her mind, but a snippet of laughter escaped her lips. Behind her, hearing her laugh again, Bedivere resisted the urge to ask. The first time he'd inquired, she'd simply replied, "I just thought of something happy." After that, he'd stopped asking. But as Guinevere's laughter continued, the wind began to howl across the desert. A massive sandstorm, visible to the naked eye, swept toward them, blotting out the sun. Guinevere's laughter died. She had no choice but to don her holy shroud cloak to keep the swirling sand from filling her hair, mouth, and nose. "Ruler, should we find shelter?" Bedivere asked. "No, prepare for battle." "Something's coming," she replied. "By the way, are we really heading in the opposite direction of Jerusalem?" "I don't know. But as long as we keep moving forward, we're bound to run into someone who can guide us." Just like in the other world, this Bedivere also had only one arm. To bolster his otherwise frail physique and to conceal the Excalibur he now wielded, Merlin had gifted him the divine arm of the Celtic war god, Nuada. This became his noble phantasm, the silver arm. He kept this arm hidden, instead holding a common knight's longsword in his remaining hand. Stepping in front of Guinevere, he stood guard, wary of the something she had mentioned. Before long, the sandstorm engulfed them. When the stinging sand made it impossible to keep their eyes open, they had to rely on their senses to perceive their surroundings. As a ruler, Guinevere's perception was greatly enhanced. As she sensed a magical beast rapidly approaching, she also detected the familiar auras of several servants. And from the side, a vehicle was speeding toward them, one that would likely reach those familiar presences before she and Guinevere could. Sphinx, that was the type of magical beast. Hassan of the 100 Faces, whom she had just fought to the death, that was the source of one of the familiar auras. As for the vehicle, southwest, out of place in this era. Guinevere thought for a moment and realized it must belong to the human order restorers from Chaldea. What a fateful encounter, she murmured with a soft laugh. To run into them so soon. Extending her perception further, she bypassed Guinevere and gestured for him to follow. Let's go. We've likely found the people from Chaldea. Guinevere already knew everything about Chaldea. After Guinevere was awakened, Merlin had provided him with the same information. According to Merlin, the Chaldea team was the key to atoning for his mistakes. Filled with a mix of joy and the bitter frustration of having to let his ruler lead the way, Guinevere replied, "Yes, my lady," and hurried to keep pace. Chapter 149, Chapter 149, First Meeting, Chaldea. 1179 words: smash them with the back of your shield. A short while later, as Guinevere and Guinevere braved the sandstorm and emerged on the leeward side of the battlefield, they easily spotted the 3 Chaldea members surrounded by skull-faced figures in tight bodysuits. However, when Guinevere saw that Chaldea's master was an orange-haired girl, her smile stiffened slightly. She began to doubt whether her support was even needed. In her memories, Chaldea's orange-haired female master was incredibly powerful, strong enough to tear apart the demon god king with her bare hands. Thank goodness, she's just an ordinary girl. On the battlefield, the orange-haired girl was hiding behind the large shield-wielding Mash, stumbling whenever the skull-faced figures attacked. By all appearances, she was just a normal master. Guinevere's gaze shifted from the girl to Mash. She quickly scanned Mash's revealing armor, her eyes lingering on the exposed thighs and the curve of her hips. Truly the lewd eggplant. From their position on the leeward side of the dune, Guinevere wondered if Chaldea's trio had noticed them. Besides the fighting Mash and the orange-haired girl, Chaldea's third member was a formidable caster. So beautiful, truly a body modeled after the Mona Lisa. A shame the soul within is male, the universal man, Da Vinci-chan. When most people heard the name Da Vinci, they immediately thought of a genius in science, mathematics, engineering, natural history, music, architecture, sculpture, painting, invention, and weapons development. Yet, some might not recognize his name. But mention the famous painting Mona Lisa's smile, and no one in later generations would be ignorant. Miss Ruler, are we really just going to watch? Let's observe for now. Those assassins pose no threat to them. Hassan of the 100 Faces was weak in the Fourth Holy Grail War, and weak now. Yet, these very Hassans had successfully infiltrated the palace of the Sun King, Ramesses II. After drugging and incapacitating Nitocris, the magecraft queen of ancient Egypt, they had managed to smuggle her away. According to Guinevere's memories, this singularity was divided into 3 major factions: New Camelot, founded by the Lion King, the native mountain people, and the Pharaoh faction, formed by the Sun King of Egypt and his magecraft queen. In Guinevere's recollection, the abduction of the magecraft queen by Hassan of the 100 Faces, and Chaldea's subsequent intervention to stop them, marked the very beginning of this singularity's story. If what happens next is the rescued magecraft queen turning on Chaldea's group, and the magical beast Sphinx that's been tailing them also appears, then that would be enough to prove one thing to Guinevere: the story of this singularity was unfolding exactly as she knew it. No deviations had occurred before her intervention. I told you those assassins were no threat. On the battlefield, Mash had already secured victory. After clearing 5 singularities, she had become a highly skilled demi-servant. Because she only struck them with the flat of her shield, the assassins were injured but not killed. After hurling some crude insults at Mash, they chose to abandon the fight and retreat. "Miss Ruler, are we just going to keep watching? That shield. That's our round table. It's Galahad's shield, and that little girl is the one he acknowledged." Still within the sandstorm, Guinevere and Bedivere continued to observe. They watched as the dark-skinned, flat-chested Pharaoh Queen was dragged out, and saw Da Vinci-chan gently prod her with her heavy staff. A moment later, the dark-skinned, flat-chested Pharaoh Queen awoke and immediately erupted into a fierce argument with the three from Chaldea. Just as Guinevere remembered, after the argument, the Pharaoh Queen attacked Chaldea. Upon her initial defeat, she summoned the magical beast Sphinx that had been trailing her. That magical beast, it belonged to the Sun King, Ramesses II. "Miss Ruler, are we really not going to help?" Mash had easily defeated Hassan of the 100 Faces, and then she and Da Vinci-chan had just as easily defeated the newly awakened Nitocris. But against the combined might of Nitocris and the Sphinx, the 10-meter-tall lion-bodied creature effortlessly overwhelmed Mash, each swipe of its claws driving her lower legs deep into the sand. In Guinevere's memory, this was when Bedivere had intervened, using his silver arm to rescue the Chaldea team. So, to prevent the Chaldea team from being eliminated here, and now, Guinevere having seen what she wanted to see made her move. Beating Bedivere to it, she extended her hand toward the towering Sphinx and activated her executioner's skill. This skill granted her control over and immunity to flames. But the flames she commanded were no ordinary fire. They were flames imbued with the true meaning of divine punishment, dealing extra damage to sinners and heretics. As a magical beast from another mythological system, the Sphinx clearly fell into the category of heretic. And so, as the golden flames of divine punishment erupted on the Sphinx's body and swelled rapidly as if doused in oil, agonized, violent roars instantly pierced the heavens. The Sphinx's cat-like eyes fixed their gaze directly on Guinevere. The sandstorm intensified, as if this were its own domain. When the gale blew back Guinevere's hood, revealing her short golden hair whipping in the wind, both the Sphinx and Nitocris froze abruptly. They ceased their assault on the Chaldea team. The Sphinx lunged forward to buy time, while Nitocris prepared to retreat. They must have recognized Guinevere's face. The flames are quite effective, making the Sphinx feel pain. They should be excellent for clearing out lesser enemies, Guinevere mused. But to kill this monster which is actually summoned by a noble phantasm, it seems I still lack the firepower. As she spoke, the Sphinx closed in. But before Guinevere needed to act, Bedivere, the king's personal knight, stepped forward and struck down the beast for her. When the silver arm was unleashed, Bedivere shone with a light far beyond his own mortal reach. After the light faded, the Sphinx was cleaved in two, dissolving into spiritual particles and vanishing. The entire kill took only the single second of that one strike. The other figure, clad in Camelot-style armor, approached step by step after the Sphinx's death. But as Guinevere drew closer, Nitocris began to sense something was wrong. The golden-haired girl leading the way wasn't wearing armor beneath her cloak, but strange attire she had never seen before. Moreover, while this newcomer bore the Lion King's face, she lacked the Lion King's detached divinity. At the same time, Nitocris noticed the Chaldea team's guarded stance. It was clear that although the shield-wielding girl wore Camelot's equipment, they seemed unfamiliar with the two newcomers. They did seem familiar because... "Doesn't this golden-haired girl look familiar?" Mash shouted back, holding her shield protectively in front of the orange-haired girl. "She looks just like the King of Knights from Singularity F. And with that outfit, she's obviously not from this era, right? Could she be a rogue servant we can recruit?" Her question, spoken loudly, reached Guinevere, who was now close enough to hear. Chapter 150, Wait, you're the King of Knights. 1263 words forward. When she was just a few steps from the wary Mash and the others, Guinevere broke into a smile, spread her hands open, and greeted them with the warmth of a girl next door. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Mash and the other two from Chaldea. My class is Ruler, and my true name is Artoria Pendragon, the very King of Knights you're thinking of. Merlichan sent me. I'm here to help you correct this singularity. Nitocris had already abandoned any thought of escape. Guinevere had discreetly blocked her retreat route. Amidst the sandstorm, Nitocris stared blankly as she heard these words. As a servant summoned by the Sun King, she was completely in the dark about this era and Chaldea. But what about the three from Chaldea? Before their human reflexes could even kick in, a small beast darted out from the orange-haired girl's arms. Crying "Foe," it leaped through the air, aiming a kick at Guinevere. Mash and the orange-haired girl were still bewildered. But Guinevere, holding Foe by the scruff of its neck, watched it continue to flail and bare its teeth. She guessed that the scent of Merlin on her had provoked it. "Easy now," she whispered, bringing Foe close to her lips. "I'm not that old geezer Merlin. You don't need to hate me. When the time comes, I'll give him a good punch for you." She had deliberately used Merlichan when speaking to Mash and the others, concealing Merlin's true name. This was Merlin's own request, though Guinevere had no idea who she was trying to catfish. Only then did Mash and the others finally process everything. They recalled what Dr. Romani had told them just before she appeared. Their eyes met, exchanging looks of disbelief. Neither Mash nor the orange-haired girl had expected Dr. Romani's words to be true. "Wait," Mash stammered, "you said you're a ruler and the king of knights?" "Absolutely. And no take-backs." Guinevere nodded with a smile. Seeing their hostility slowly fade, she stepped closer and began circling Mash, openly admiring her body. Not that Guinevere cared what anyone thought, she mused. Besides, there's no law against a girl checking out another girl's body. And anyway, she continued her internal monologue, Mash's armor is light and alluring, but it doesn't reveal anything crucial. Ah, what a beautiful, youthful, vibrant body. The orange-haired girl could tolerate Guinevere just circling Mash, but that last comment set off alarm bells in her mind. Without hesitation, she stepped in front of Mash, shielding her. Now it's my turn to be Mash's shield, she thought resolutely. However, Guinevere wasn't just interested in Mash, she found the orange-haired girl intriguing as well. Taking a step back, Guinevere's gaze swept up from the girl's black stockings and short skirt, over the white Chaldea uniform that hugged her chest like a straitjacket, accentuating her curves. Finally, as the girl instinctively crossed her arms to cover herself, Guinevere's smiling eyes settled on her face. Ah, what a beautiful, youthful, vibrant body. Hearing this for the second time made Guinevere's mouth twitch. He began to wonder if this king was a bit too unconventional. But after thinking it over, he realized he found a more lively king far more reassuring. Besides, he reasoned, her expression only shows admiration and playful teasing, not the kind of desire that wants to pin her target down. Until now, Mash had always been the one teased by the orange-haired girl being pulled into her arms. Having her tights flicked it was practically routine. This was the first time Mash had ever seen the orange-haired girl flustered by another woman. Supporting her from behind, Mash watched as Guinevere's expression shifted to curiosity. Perhaps from being teased so often herself, Mash had developed a quick resistance. At worst, she thought, it's just one more senior doing the same things to me. For some reason, she found this Guinevere strangely familiar and comforting, even more so than the darkened sword-class king of knights she'd encountered in Singularity F. "So, Mash Kirilite, that's your name, right? Do you want to know the name of the servant who lent you their power?" If Guinevere hadn't intervened, Mash still wouldn't know the name of the servant who lent her power. Guinevere had no intention of keeping it a secret. In fact, she eagerly awaited the day Mash would call her auntie, just as Galahad once had. However, her words were cut off by Da Vinci-chan, who had been AFK until now. The universal genius cleared her throat and spoke up, "Miss Ruler, I personally think it would be better for Mash to figure it out on her own. By the way, since you already know Mash's name, Duritsuka and I still need to introduce ourselves. Aren't you going to introduce that knight over there?" "Oh, that's Sir Guinevere. He and I will be working together to defeat my other self." Beside her, Guinevere opened his mouth but remained silent. For Chaldea, which was still almost completely in the dark about this singularity, Guinevere's statement contained an overwhelming amount of information. In contrast, Nitocris finally understood the situation. The self-proclaimed king of knights before her intended to defeat the Lion King, the one who had destroyed Jerusalem and built New Camelot City upon its ruins. All of you. Guinevere didn't know much about how Egyptian pharaohs dressed, but even she thought this dark-skinned pharaoh was dressed far too scantily. Her lower body was clad only in sandals and panties, while her top barely covered her vital areas, leaving her toned abdomen fully exposed. When she spoke, everyone turned to look at her. Before she could decide what to say and prepare to attack, Guinevere spoke first. If you insist on fighting, I will send you straight back to the throne of heroes. But before you seek your own demise, there's a truth you must know. We all met by chance, and Mash and her companions only intervened because they saw you being abducted by the mountain people. I swear this is the truth, on my honor as the King of Knights. Because she had been summoned by the Sun King, without the Holy Grail granting her knowledge of later eras, Nitocris was unfamiliar with the legend of the King of Knights. However, in this world, she had already clashed with the Knights of New Camelot many times. She knew they were cruel and inhumane, but they also valued their honor. Moreover, as time passed and the initial grogginess of waking up completely faded, she began to recall the last thing she had seen before falling unconscious. Her dark, deeply bronzed face didn't show a blush, but her increasingly awkward movements betrayed her apology. In any case, thank you. I'll host you. No, escort me to the Sun King's temple. The Sun King I serve will grant you a just reward. As she spoke, the caster-class pharaoh began to pray to the sky. After a moment, though it was unclear what she had chanted, the sandstorm, which had already been subsiding, completely ceased, revealing a clear sky, and suspended high above, the incineration of human order, a band of light belonging to the demon god King Goetia. At Nitocris's invitation, Guinevere was eager to see the Sun King's tomb. However, the three from Chaldea looked at her, wanting to gather more information from her first. In any case, since you won't let me reveal that servant's true name, you can just explore the singularity on your own. Chapter 151, Chapter 151, The Sun King, and King Hassan 1240 words Sun King Ramesses II, true name Ozymandias, the most famous pharaoh of ancient Egypt. Legend held that he surpassed most gods and could stand shoulder to shoulder with Ra, the supreme sun god of ancient Egypt. When summoned, his domain is summoned along with him. He possesses multiple noble phantasms, the imperial privilege skill, and the claim that all structures on earth are his creations, making him an exceptionally powerful servant. The Sphinx that had previously overwhelmed Mash and Da Vinci Chan, only to be defeated by Guinevere's silver arm, was a product of one of the Sun King's noble phantasms, and he could produce multiple such sphinxes. In terms of power scaling within the FGO universe, he is known as one of the three Golden Kings, placing him on the same level as the King of Heroes, Gilgamesh, and the hero of charity, Karna. Miss Ruler, are we really not going with them? That Sun King. He would be a valuable ally if we want to defeat my other self. But how should I put this? Do you want me to go kill him right now, or be killed by him? Miss Ruler, are you saying you two would fight the moment you met? Knowing that Sun King, he'd look down on us all, wouldn't he? He'd demand we kneel and bow upon our first meeting, wouldn't he? Guinevere, tell me, should I kneel? As Guinevere recalled, the Sun King's power was comparable to the King of Heroes, and their personalities were much the same. Both looked down on everyone equally. Moreover, he was even more lecherous than the King of Heroes. Historically, he had married numerous beauties and fathered over 1,000 children. Guinevere remembered that upon first meeting Da Vinci Chan, he had immediately declared his intention to make her his concubine. Of course, if he were in a good mood and took a liking to someone, he would also bestow rewards without hesitation. Then, Miss Ruler, what should we do now? We head toward Jerusalem, of course. Meeting Chaldea's group had another significant advantage. They had confirmed their location from Nitocris and learned the direction to Jerusalem. As they continued their journey under their cloaks, the sun, now approaching its zenith, grew even hotter. Behind them, in the same desert, Nitocris was being carried on Ritsuka's back, her expression unreadable as she guided the Chaldea party. For a pharaoh, a servant, and an incarnation of the sky god Horus, it was unbelievable that her feet, clad only in thin sandals, had been burned by the hot sand. TCH, this singularity's timeline is truly chaotic. Nitocris's claim that she would need protection once the sandstorm subsided proved to be true. The sandstorm had isolated this desert from the outside world, preventing external demonic beasts from entering. The moment it stopped, Guinevere ventured a little further, and was immediately confronted by anemone-shaped sea demons. Sea demons appearing in a desert was strange enough. But Hassans in black robes and skull masks appearing in the desert was surely just as strange, wasn't it? They're surprisingly weak. A single Hassan can't even defeat a sea demon. Atop a sand dune, Guinevere remarked with a sigh as she watched a Hassan struggling with a sea demon in the distance. Faced with another choice, Guinevere didn't hesitate this time. She and Bedivere advanced directly. With a snap of her fingers, golden flames erupted on the dozen or so man-sized sea demons, swiftly incinerating them to ash. I must say, she began, for beings of your caliber, it's astonishing you managed to successfully steal someone from the Sun King's temple. They had been saved, but they also knew their saviors were companions of the Chaldea group they had previously attacked. After being forced to abandon Nitocris, the Hassans who shared the name of 100 Faces hadn't retreated far. Some remained nearby, observing from a distance. They had appeared on Guinevere and her companion's path with the clear intention of ambushing them. The sea demon attack, however, was a complete accident. They never imagined a sea demon would spawn right in their faces. Who exactly are you? Saved, yet looked down upon. Even the frail 100-faced Hassans felt a surge of anger. But recalling the sea demon's inexplicable self-immolation, and knowing they were no match for these two, their regret over the failed ambush mingled with a desire for more information. They were not fighting for themselves. Long, long ago, back when Chaldea was still conquering the first few singularities, this one had already begun to change. First, the defeated Crusaders inexplicably obtained the Holy Grail and successfully summoned the Sun King. Then, the Crusaders suffered a devastating blow. Not only did the Sun King seize the Holy Grail from them, but their entire force was annihilated. Logically, the Sun King should have been the true anomaly of this singularity. The problem was, the Lion King then appeared. She destroyed Jerusalem, repelled the Sun King, and established New Camelot City on Jerusalem's ruins. Building on this, the annihilated Crusaders were outsiders, as were the subsequent Sun King and Lion King. Only they, the mountain people, were the true natives. At the same time, among the three factions in this singularity, they were ostensibly the weakest. Just as Guinevere had said, with the 100-faced Hassan's level of skill, they should never have been able to abduct someone from the Sun King's temple. Within this desert, within the Sun King's domain, they should have been under constant surveillance, subject to attacks from multiple sphinxes at any moment. As they faced off, Guinevere read the unease in the 100 Faces' eyes, and guessed they had no idea how they had succeeded in their abduction. With a soft click of her tongue, Guinevere refrained from attacking them. She knew the real reason the 100 Faces had succeeded: the king of the Hassans had intervened. That grand assassin had infiltrated the Sun King's composite temple, and beheaded him in a single strike. Although the Sun King clung to life through the power of his temple, he could no longer leave it, and his consciousness had briefly lapsed into confusion. I am Artoria Pendragon, the other side of the Lion King, you know. I answered a certain summons for the sole purpose of personally resolving the tragedy of my other self. Therefore, we are not enemies. We can be allies. This was her second self-introduction in a short time, and just as with Nitocris, the 100 Faces didn't believe Guinevere's claim. This was simply because the self-proclaimed King of Knights was vastly different from the one they knew. However, the 100 Faces could confirm one thing: based on their assassin senses, Guinevere truly bore no ill will. They met her gaze, then retreated, neither approaching nor engaging further. The 100 Faces decided to observe first. Only after confirming the truth of her words, and her genuine desire for an alliance, would they reveal themselves again. Moreover, they planned to report the appearance of another king of knights to the current Hassan overseer. They weren't the only Hassans summoned in this era. Meanwhile, Guinevere had no idea what the retreating figures were thinking. She only saw them suddenly pause, their auras flaring with fervent energy as they stared into the desert's depths before retreating even faster. Soon, even with her ruler-class perception, she could no longer find them. Chapter 152, Chapter 152, First Meeting, Sir Tristan, 1353 words forward, ever forward, until they finally emerged from the desert. Before them stretched a scorched, withered land, burned to cinders. Apparent temperature, 48 degrees Celsius. Relative humidity, 0%. The mana density in the atmosphere is far lower than in the desert. This is indeed an environment where ordinary humans cannot survive. Guinevere still retained memories of this singularity from her past life, so she was somewhat prepared for the scene outside the desert. Yet, as a wave of heat even more intense than the desert's washed over her, and she gazed upon the blackened, withered earth stretching to the horizon, she couldn't help but voice her astonishment. She knew, however, that this scorched land was not the work of the Sun King, or the Lion King. It was the masterpiece of the demon god king, who sought only to incinerate the human order. The longer a singularity developed and the more it deviated from its original history, the more it would be affected by the incineration of the human order, drawing closer to the end of the world. In other words, any singularity guided into existence by Goetia was destined for destruction. But destined for was not the same as already destroyed. In the process, some things inevitably remained like the living dead who, upon spotting Guinevere and her companion, began to shamble forward, surrounding them. It's food. It's meat. Ah, a woman who looks delicious. Thank you so much. I'm truly grateful you've all survived until now just for me. This was still only the edge of the desert, but perhaps it was precisely because it was the edge that they had encountered so many living dead at once. They could still speak, still roar, but they had completely shed the moral restraints of humanity. Their bodies had already begun to half-gullify, transforming them into monsters that could no longer be considered human. Miss Ruler. Bedivere, they've eaten people before, haven't they? They wouldn't say a woman looks delicious otherwise, right? So it would be perfectly reasonable for me to kill them, wouldn't it? As far back as she could remember, the living dead before her were the most twisted humans Guinevere had ever seen. The apocalypse was indeed far more brutal than any era of war. She pitied them and she lamented their fall, but most importantly, they were already attacking. Should I just purify them with flames? After using fire twice already, Guinevere wanted to try a different skill first. She snapped her fingers, giving herself a mental cue, and immediately activated her skill, Judgment. In an instant, the living dead froze. Guinevere had branded them as evil, causing them to suffer increased damage when attacked by her. Simultaneously, their minds were tormented, forced to relive every sin they had committed in recent days. Thus, if their moral compass remained, they would naturally feel regret. Even if they didn't break down weeping and kneeling in repentance, they would at least hesitate before committing what they knew to be wrong. But if their moral compass was gone, or if they insisted that breaking moral codes was no longer wrong, wouldn't they just attack with even greater ferocity? Just as she thought, 90% of them collapsed to their knees, weeping and begging the Lord for forgiveness and salvation. But the remaining 10% fully transformed into ghouls, lunging forward as if driven by madness enhancement. The test of her judgment skill was complete. The effect differed slightly from what Guinevere had expected, but it was undeniably a powerful ability, perfectly suited for dealing with those whose wills were weak. With the test concluded, Guinevere once again ignited the golden flames of execution, incinerating the remaining ghouls that charged at her. But as they watched the ghouls die, some of the weeping living dead did the same. Their own family members had been among the first wave of attackers. Miss Ruler, why did you? The ones who dared to attack died. The ones who wept in repentance also died. Guinevere granted the same fire to every attacker she encountered. If they confessed their sins, they must face justice. They admitted it themselves, they've all eaten people. Besides, I can't guarantee how long their remorse will last. Perhaps as soon as we leave, hunger will drive them back to their old ways. Guinevere, since we lack the ability to save them completely, we must see this through to the end. People aren't firewood, after all, they take longer to burn completely. Bathed in the light of the many human torches, Guinevere slowly nodded at Guinevere. He was a knight, after all, and no stranger to having blood on his hands. Besides, there truly was reason to send these attackers to their deaths. Miss Ruler, I understand. He tapped his right fist against his chest, the clang of metal on metal ringing out. After another glance at the burning figures, Guinevere fell into step behind Guinevere, his curiosity about what the King of Knights had endured growing ever stronger. The disaster in this singularity wasn't just the calamity wrought by the demon god king, it was also the human calamity created by the Lion King. If the singularity was doomed to destruction, what should someone with the will to save do? The Lion King's choice was to save only those worthy of salvation. As for the unworthy, they were simply to be culled. Forward, forward until Guinevere's extended senses detected new life, a presence that made her pause, lost in a wave of nostalgia. Miss Ruler, is that? Yes, it must be Sir Tristan. In Guinevere's memory, the Chaldea party had been delayed in the desert for 2 days. During that time, they encountered maddened civilians and Sir Tristan, who was hunting Hassan of intoxicated smoke, and the mountain people under his protection. However, since Guinevere and her companion weren't heading to the Sun King's temple like the Chaldea trio, they had exited the desert 2 days earlier. Thus, they encountered Sir Tristan shortly after he had begun his hunt. He and his knights had been drawn to the commotion at the border, and had come to investigate. From a distance, their figures came into the perception of Tristan and his knights. First came the clamor of his enforcement knights, followed by Tristan himself forcing open his ruined eyes. If he could still see, he would have witnessed the King of Knights, clad in strange attire, waving and smiling at him, mouthing the words, Sir Tristan. But even without sight, the aura of the King of Knights and Guinevere's presence were unmistakably familiar to him, even if this King of Knights aura felt odd, tinged with the scent of another familiar person. Confusion and bewilderment flooded his mind, leaving it in chaos. He subconsciously dismounted and bowed, then instinctively moved closer to Guinevere and Guinevere. Yet, he was still a powerful knight. Driven by the sorrow of being unable to bear killing his comrades, he had chosen to receive the blessing of inversion from the Lion King. Since then, he no longer feared poison, and his personality had twisted from gentle and poetic to cruel and bloodthirsty. Fortunately, his gender hadn't changed to female. Toward this King of Knights and the Guinevere beside her, he halted and adopted a stance of maximum vigilance. We meet for the first time, Sir Tristan, Guinevere said, her steps never faltering until she was less than 10 meters away. During her approach, Tristan repeatedly tried to draw his bowstring, but found himself unable to release an arrow. I am a King of Knights from another possibility. I was summoned to correct the mistakes of my other self. Hearing Guinevere repeat these words, Tristan plunged into even deeper confusion. He had chosen to serve the Lion King, even at the cost of betraying his knightly virtues, but he had always known it was wrong. Sir Tristan, Guinevere asked, will you join my side? Together with your dear friend, Guinevere. Guinevere held the utmost goodwill and expectation for Tristan, even if he wasn't the Tristan who belonged to her. Chapter 153, Chapter 153, Sir Tristan, you are my prisoner. 1344 words without Guinevere, what would have become of Tristan? He would have had his beloved stolen from him, and died by poison in battle. Upon leaving the round table, he would have blurted out, the King of Knights does not understand the human heart. But this time, he had been summoned by the King of Knights who should have died, and he had resolved to serve the round table faithfully to the very end, no matter what. You are not my king, Tristan declared, and Guinevere's respect for you is not the reverence one shows to a sovereign. After blinding himself, Tristan could no longer see any light, but his senses had sharpened, making him far more sensitive to things unseen by the eye. You say you wish to correct the mistakes of your other self. How, I wonder, do you intend to do that? By granting her a long overdue rest, of course. How truly tragic, Tristan lamented. Must I not only witness a civil war among my comrades, but also a conflict between two kings? Tristan pressed a hand to his forehead, his expression sorrowful. Then, he performed a knight's salute, one reserved for a different king, to declare his stance. After retreating several steps, he assumed a defensive posture, waiting for an attack. Sir Tristan, you are no match for me, and I have no desire to fight you. The failure was expected. After a brief moment of disappointment, Guinevere's smile returned. She was absolutely confident she could defeat any of the Round Table knights, even with their strange blessings that made them slightly stronger than she remembered. Yet, despite Guinevere's words, Tristan shook his head, and maintained his ready stance. Your Grace, he said, you claim to be a king from another possibility. Then prove it with your actions. Among knights the clash of swords speaks truer than any words. A flicker of memory crossed Guinevere's mind. It felt as if she or perhaps Leah had said something similar shortly after they first met. After the fleeting moment of nostalgia, Guinevere drew her sword. A replica holy sword, or perhaps the noble phantasm, the sword of destined judgment. From its aura alone, there was no doubt it was Excalibur itself. Admittedly, if Tristan still had his sight, he would have noticed the sword lacked its fairy script. He had destroyed his own eyes. Misruler, this. Without sight, Tristan believed Guinevere's claim because of the sword's aura. With sight, Bedivere began to doubt the very woman he had just started to trust. Tristan immediately sensed Bedivere's suspicion. Without hesitation, he drew his bow across the strings, transforming the music into invisible blades that surged toward Guinevere. I told you, Guinevere said calmly, you are no match for me. In her previous life, after marrying Leah, Guinevere had spent half of every day in the training grounds unless urgent matters arose. She had fought every Round Table knight more than once. And she was intimately familiar with the music of Sir Tristan, who had served her from the very beginning, and belonged to her alone. Closing her eyes, she swung her sword with effortless grace, shattering the invisible sound blades. As Tristan's music grew more frantic, she advanced with the steady, cat-like poise of a predator, closing the distance until she stood just 3 steps away. Then, she rested the tip of the replica holy sword on his shoulder. I know every possible variation of your harp's melody by heart. This was no empty boast, as Guinevere's recent combat performance had just proven. For some reason, the thought that this king had actually memorized his entire repertoire moved Tristan to the point of tears. How tragic, that the me of another possibility could have had a liege lord like you. Tristan lowered his bow, awaiting Guinevere's final blow. He called her liege lord, not king, clearly believing his own king of knights would never possess such insight. I am curious about the story of that other possibility, but... If you're curious, then just ask me directly. Guinevere could have struck him down, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. Nor was there any need to act now. Sheathing her sword, she shot a glare at the enforcement knights who had started to move toward Tristan, forcing them back. Then, Guinevere walked straight to Tristan's horse. She stroked its neck, patted its face, and after the horse snorted, she swung herself onto its back. Soon after, Tristan mounted one of the enforcement knights' horses, and Bedivere was also offered a ride. The 2 knights who had lost their mounts shared with their comrades. Your Grace, I still have a mission. You are my prisoners now. Go ahead, ask what you want. After you're done, I have some questions for you as well. Their mission had been to annihilate a village of the mountain people. But since she had declared them prisoners, Tristan had no choice but to comply. He decided to ask the questions burning in his mind first. Then, Your Grace, you said you are from another possibility. Where did this other possibility begin? As the horse's hooves clopped rhythmically, Guinevere began her story, starting from the moment the King of Knights proposed to her. What if I told you there's a possibility where Guinevere was an exceptionally good woman? The odds of that must be less than 1 in 10,000, right? Then just assume I hit that 1 in 10,000 chance. Having just finished the Fourth Holy Grail War and organized her own story through painting, Guinevere's words flowed effortlessly, without a hint of writer's block. The only embellishment was a slight, perhaps excessive, polishing of her own role in the tale. Are you saying that the me of another possibility was recruited by Guinevere early on? That I was even part of her dowry when she married the King of Knights? If you dislike that term, you can call it guardian knight. I just mistook you for him earlier. Don't worry too much about the wording. No, I don't dislike it at all, if that Guinevere truly allowed me and Isolde to marry peacefully. It was Tristan's story, but not this Tristan's story. Still, that didn't stop him from imagining himself in that role, indulging in the thought, I could have had that fate, too. As they spoke and traveled, more and more eyes in this desolate land watched them, catching snippets of Guinevere's naturally loud voice. Several hours later, as they drew close to the outskirts of Jerusalem, the group encountered an old man begging for alms. Guinevere remembered his gaze. It was so sharp that she couldn't help but glare back instinctively. Ruler, your grace, should we kill him? You know, Guinevere retorted, that mere inversion blessing has really made you bloodthirsty, hasn't it? Your grace, it is a fact, and one that saddens me. Speaking of which, that old man. He was someone who could make my skin crawl, and provoke me into glaring back. Do you really think you could handle him? Most of the Round Table Knights in this singularity were still unaware of King Hassan's existence. They were simply following the orders of this singularity's King of Knights, the Lion King. After Guinevere's words, Tristan, who had already guessed her true name, abandoned the pursuit. He also raised his guard against the mountain people by several levels. Previously, he had merely thought the mountain people were exceptionally brave. The Hassans, knowing full well that confronting the Round Table Knights meant certain death, still unhesitatingly stood before them to protect their people. Ruler, your grace, we're approaching Camelot City. Tristan fell silent. The atmosphere among the enforcement knights behind them grew heavy. They knew all too well what had happened at Camelot City, an act that utterly disregarded the knight's code. Sir Tristan, you and the others should return ahead, Guinevere commanded. Go and loudly proclaim my arrival to the other knights and to the other me. Tell the Lion King that Bedivere, and I have come to liberate her. Chapter 154, Chapter 154, Mordred, It's Queen Mother. 1185 words after crossing the wasteland and passing the ruined outskirts of Jerusalem, Guinevere and Bedivere arrived just outside New Camelot City, watched by thousands of numb eyes. It's just as I remember, she thought. New Camelot City was also divided into upper, middle, and lower sections. Its pure white walls stood tall and straight, stretching across the endless wasteland. As the only great city in this singularity, legend held that a utopia free from pain and hunger awaited just beyond its main gate. Because of this, large crowds regularly gathered outside Camelot City for the holy selection. Those who passed would be granted entry and become residents. Those who failed. Miss Ruler. I thought I was prepared, but seeing the ground littered with corpses after the holy selection still infuriates me. In life, Guinevere had been known for her ruthlessness, but she never engaged in meaningless slaughter. Back then, the King of Knights had always acted as a safety valve, with Guinevere playing the role of the stern enforcer. But now, atop the high walls of New Camelot City, the King of Knights, clad in silver armor, a pure white cape, and a lion-shaped helmet, stood like a doll, watching the massacre below continue. Following Guinevere's orders, Tristan and his knights had gone ahead to announce her arrival. By now, Tristan should have completed his task. But the price for his early return to report his mission was that he had triggered the holy selection ahead of schedule and become its executioner. The sound of a harp played furiously, and soon, not a single living soul remained outside the gates of New Camelot City. Witnessing Leah's cold indifference firsthand, watching her stand silently as the people died, Guinevere felt deeply unsettled. This was truly not her Leah. As Tristan finished his grim task, he saw Guinevere and Bedivere approaching on horseback. Shame Ward with his sworn loyalty to the king on the wall. In the next moment, Tristan freed one hand, pressed it to his face, and dug his fingertips into his own flesh. Then, he dragged his hand downward, leaving his face a bloody mess. He had once blinded himself to avoid witnessing his comrades fight each other. Now he disfigured his face, unable to bear showing it to Guinevere and Bedivere after violating the code of chivalry. After this act, the Lion King's holy selection for him concluded. He had proven his loyalty. Meanwhile, more Round Table knights in capes and armor appeared beside the Lion King. Sir Gawain of this world silently emerged from the city gates. Guinevere kicked her mount's flank Tristan's horse, urging it slowly forward. Bedivere followed slightly behind her. As they advanced, both removed their cloaks, revealing their true identities to all, both on the walls and below. Agravain, Gawain, Lancelot, Mordred. How utterly loyal you all are to the king. Guinevere's horse halted. Her voice dripped with sarcasm as she used her mana to conjure armor the very same set her alternate self, Leah, wore as a saber-class servant. However, she didn't bother equipping the quilted cloak. Rage, murderous intent, a strange sense of gratification, and disappointment in their failings, these emotions churned within Guinevere. As the saber-class version of Guinevere appeared, her expression stern and resolute, a subtle commotion rippled across the city walls. But this disturbance, originating from Mordred, was swiftly silenced by the Lion King's single, sharp humph. Guilt, unease, helplessness, and doubt, these were the emotions swirling within Gawain as he walked down from the walls, approaching Guinevere. In the history without Guinevere, Gawain had lost his brothers and sister at Lancelot's hands. After battling Lancelot for an entire day, he was defeated at nightfall. Gawain's end came from the lingering wounds of that defeat, dying in grief and despair. Summoned by the Lion King, and now serving under her, Gawain's sole desire was to offer her victory. In return, he received the Lion King's knightlessness blessing, ensuring he would forever be treated as if standing beneath the midday sun. Tristan said you were a king from another possibility. Though he no longer believes it, and judging by Mordred's reaction just now, you're clearly not her father. But to me, whether your claims are true or not, I will guard the gates of the holy city. I will deny you passage to the king's side. Besides, I'm curious to see if your familiarity with me is as thorough as your knowledge of Tristan. It's been a long time. I never expected you to join the side that denies the king. Seeing Guinevere and Bedivere certainly caused a stir among them, but they had already endured a round of internal slaughter. The Lion King had initially summoned more than just these few Round Table knights. Those who answered her call but rejected her ideals had all been sent back to the throne of heroes. So, after a brief moment of hesitation, they, like Tristan, chose to reject the alternative Guinevere offered. Performing the salute reserved for another king, Gawain raised his sword to Guinevere outside New Camelot. This was his invitation. On the city walls, the Lion King and the others remained silent. Mordred, who had caused the earlier commotion, moved closer to the parapet, gazing at Guinevere with the eager expression of a puppy. Rest assured. Though we have fallen, we have not fallen completely. Neither the king nor the other knights will interfere in our duel. Noticing Guinevere still gazing at the city walls, her expression growing subtle, Gawain spoke up, feeling ignored. Should I retreat? Or fight this battle? If she were a caster, Guinevere could try supporting Bedivere, and the two of them might be able to push through. But as a ruler, her class lacked the caster's cheats. She needed allies. Fighting here to demonstrate her strength and stance to potential allies seemed reason enough. But casting all reason aside, Guinevere's anger toward the current Artoria was mounting. She also desperately wanted to teach a harsh lesson to Gawain and the others for their blind, foolish loyalty. So she acted. Dismounting, she drew her replica holy sword. Faced with this blade, its aura identical to Excalibur, yet absent from their memories, Gawain, momentarily stunned, performed a knight's salute. On the city walls, Mordred abruptly clamped a hand over her mouth, stifling the gasp that nearly escaped her lips. In that instant, all the knights around her turned to look at her. The Lion King, who had been as still as a doll until now, finally spoke, her voice soft. "Is that her, Mordred? Have you chosen to rebel against me?" Her voice on the city walls wasn't loud, certainly not loud enough to reach Gawain and Guinevere, who were already locked in combat below. In another world, Merlin had told Guinevere she would regret not coming here. He wasn't just referring to the corrupted Lion King, but also to Mordred summoned here, but now on Guinevere's side. "Father, you can't defeat Mother. In my world, you never could." Though the knights watched her with wary eyes, Mordred didn't immediately rush to Guinevere's side after speaking. Chapter 155, Chapter 155, Mordred's Wish, and the Night Blessed by the Sun. 1351 words. Long, long ago, after the Battle of Camlan, what did Mordred living under a new name do? First, she continued Guinevere's policies, establishing new academies, and actively replacing unprofessional knights with professionally trained scholars. This cleared the kingdom's politics, unified its laws, and further centralized power. Second, she deepened her collaboration with mages, who developed new high-yield crops. Building on this, she lowered taxes and reduced labor levies, allowing the people to accumulate wealth. Through these and other gradual reforms, such as expanding the number of participants in the Round Table deliberations, and allowing civil officials to join the rebranded Camelot, with the support of knights like Agravain, who had also adopted new names, stumbled into a 20-year golden age. During this period, the kingdom's agriculture, animal husbandry, industry, and commerce flourished. However, when war again broke out with the European continent, the kingdom could only achieve a Pyrrhic victory. Britain no longer benefited from its fading age of mystery. The number of knights who could wield mana dwindled, and 20 years of systematically reducing the knightly class's authority further weakened their strength. After the Golden Age, Mordred's kingdom began its decline. The catalyst was the ambition of her nominal adopted sons and daughters, in reality, new brothers and sisters created by Morgan. It was as if the fate originally meant for Mordred had fallen upon these children instead. Their ambition, combined with the rebellious sentiments of the overly suppressed knightly class, ignited a civil war. By the time Mordred crushed the rebellion, leaving her with no more brothers or sisters, few of the new knights remained loyal to her. Time, as they say, is a butcher's knife, and it swiftly claimed the lives of the already aging Agravain and his peers. Meanwhile, with Lancelot's death in Gaul, the Gallic royal family reclaimed their authority, severing the Mordred kingdom's greatest external support. In the end, the kingdom fractured into warring factions. The Round Table Council, now bloated with hundreds of members, descended into mutual accusations. Another civil war erupted over Mordred's lack of an heir. It was then that Mordred finally accepted a harsh truth: she truly lacked the talent to rule a nation. Yet her greatest failure lay in the rebellion of her brothers and sisters. After losing faith in her mother Morgan's homunculus technology, she had begun to believe in the power of ideals to ensure her legacy. She overlooked the fact that every one of her knights considered themselves the true inheritor of her ideals. In the kingdom's final days, if Mordred had only had a child, there would have been a legitimate heir to sustain the kingdom. The war that broke out as she lay dying would never have happened. Her ideals, born from Guinevere's influence, were far ahead of their time. "It's precisely because I failed that my wish is no longer to be a king," Mordred murmured to herself on the city wall. "I just want to apologize to my father and Queen Mother for failing their expectations." The knights had long known she was not the knight of rebellion they were familiar with. So, when Mordred made her judgment about the newcomer and uttered her audacious words to the Lion King remained unfazed. Tristan, who had just reached the wall, wore an expression that said, "Just as I thought." Only Lancelot stared in disbelief at the King of Knights battling Gawain at the city gate. Incredible. To be able to overpower Gawain at high noon. "Sir Mordred, is she truly the Queen Mother you spoke of, the Guinevere from another world?" Complex emotions laced Lancelot's voice, his gaze distant as his thoughts drifted elsewhere. It was a sword he had never seen before, one that could effortlessly exploit Gawain's openings and overwhelm him despite possessing weaker stats. Just by looking at the sword, it was clear its master must be exceptionally familiar with Gawain. "My king, shall we intervene?" Gawain will not lose. After the Battle of Camlan, the Lion King had wandered the world for 700 years. During this time, she continuously wielded the Holy Lance and even lost her memories. The human radiance that once belonged to Artoria had long since vanished, replaced by the selfless divinity of a storm goddess, a nature shaped by the Holy Lance's influence. In the FGO universe, the human order has already been incinerated. Chaldea conducts time travel within this incinerated present. They journey to the past to correct the anchors the demon god king set for the incineration of human order, changing the past from the present to reclaim the future from the past. During this process, the singularities serving as anchors are actually the last pure lands to be incinerated, but these pure lands are doomed to destruction. What was the Lion King's goal? She sought to preserve the finest human specimens to the greatest extent possible, creating a gene pool for a humanity destined for annihilation. Her mistake lay in believing that everything was already beyond saving. Guinevere's and Gawain's swords met in a direct clash. Whether it was Mordred's strange behavior on the city walls or the Lion King's departure, the two combatants were too focused to be distracted. Gawain was indeed formidable at noon. His strength easily overwhelmed Guinevere's, and his swordsmanship, already among the top 5 of the Round Table knights, was far from weak. In life, when Guinevere fought Gawain, she either had to unleash her full power for a swift victory or drag the fight out until nightfall. But as a ruler-class servant, without activating her second noble phantasm, which would greatly enhance her abilities, Guinevere could only rely on her sword skills to wear him down. She aimed to accumulate minor wounds into a major one, hoping to exhaust him even while he was still under the sun's blessing. Just as Tristan said, Gawain taunted, "You're familiar with his music, so you must be familiar with my sword. But have you forgotten? I once defeated a green knight, and obtained a green belt from him that makes me invulnerable." In life, Guinevere rarely participated in the individual adventures of the other knights. However, during the Round Table's feasts, the knights would always boast about their exploits. So Guinevere naturally knew about the green belt. What she didn't know was that Gawain, in his sword class, could possess this noble phantasm. And in her memories of this singularity, she couldn't recall this detail. Sheathing her sword, she retreated several steps, her gaze fixed on Gawain's magnificent silver helmet. She watched as this archetypal prince on a white horse broke into a satisfied, battle-hungry smile. Guinevere pursed her lips and prepared to attack again. "So what if you have the green belt? My objective remains unchanged." With the blessing of the sun, Gawain could fight indefinitely. Guinevere's mana, meanwhile, was sustained by the rainbow gem. Though its output was a steady, gentle stream, it was also inexhaustible. "Flames, burn the sinner with me." Holding her sword horizontally with one hand, she ignited its blade with roaring golden flames. At this moment, Guinevere still hadn't used her judgment skill on Gawain. She couldn't bring herself to condemn him as a sinner. But the flames of execution were pure power. Even if the target was innocent, she could still execute them with fire. As the flames blazed on the replica holy sword, Gawain took a deep breath and activated his numeral of the saint's skill, boosting his strength. The next instant, their figures blurred and clashed once more, the intensity of their battle escalating. The area outside New Camelot City gradually transformed into a high-temperature hell, where the scorching sun blazed and flames carpeted the ground. Slowly, Gawain began to struggle for breath. Guinevere, however, grew stronger with each passing moment, the holy shroud covering her face, shielding her from the intense heat. But Gawain was, after all, a knight blessed by the sun. The superheated air couldn't completely scorch his vulnerable insides. The battle raged on, continuing through the night when his knightlessness blessing activated Anne into the dawn and noon of the second day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.